When Li Shalai was 28 years old, he made a decision. And I decided to give up my position, leaving one of the top 100 companies in the country. The elevator slowly opened, and a man stepped out of it. In his hands was a box of things, and he solemnly gave permission for everyone to see him off. Employees ardently wished the manager a bright future, offering to help with things, but he coped on his own. In the evening, in an elite restaurant, the crowd bumped glasses that were filled with wine together. They didn't expect that one day they would have to say goodbye after all. But Li Shalai's position is very difficult to reach, and Director Guo has a good impression of him, so it was a strange decision. Li Shalai didn't change his mind with a smile. He just wanted to finally enjoy life and spend more time with his girlfriend. The employee asked what exactly he planned to do in the future. He told about his desire to open a cafe and have pets. The employees were extremely happy for the manager, who would finally be left to his own devices. The guy also wanted to live like this, but he still had a mortgage and a loan, so he can't change jobs. They were sure that he would become even more influential and asked for a discount on the visit. Li Shalai picked up his glass of wine, already anticipating his bright future. I gave them a toast to drink to it. They clinked glasses to a successful future. After a while, the cafe turned out to be very cozy and successful, and local celebrities often visited it. Li Shalai stood on the bar and was full of hope for a bright future. In the evening, he hugged the girl Gaifeng, telling her that their coffee shop had made a net profit of 100,000. Next year, they will be able to reimburse all the opening costs. Gaifeng hugged him tighter, praising her smart boyfriend. At first, Li Shalai thought that he was taking a big risk when he quit a good job. He even spent all his savings, mortgaged the house to open a cafe, and invested more than $1 million in it. But this was the most correct decision in his life. Until one situation occurred. The excavator was actively driving towards the building, taking all the soil with it. Li Shalai tried to stop the construction workers who surrounded his building. The man informed him that the land of his cafe was purchased and the building is subject to demolition. He stood there until the end, having no idea about this demolition. The man advised him to ask his landlord about it, and the builder didn't even know who Li Shalai was. Li Shalai immediately picked up the phone, intending to find out everything, and Yego was rushed because the construction was supposed to start in 3 days, and the dismantling was still not finished. He immediately called the landlord, who for some reason did not inform him about the demolition of the building. The men were laughing at the poor guy who was renting a plot of land that was originally going to be demolished for nothing. The landlord just laughed that he forgot to mention it, so he suggested that he find another place and move. He wanted to arrange a refund of his money, which he invested in promotion and repairs. The man was grinning nastily, telling him to just come up with something, considering demolition a good solution for the city. Li Shalai tried to get justice by ordering damages to be paid. Otherwise, it would be a breach of contract. The landlord was not going to reimburse anything, suggesting that he contact the committee. The builders looked at him with disapproval, considering him too young for such cases, because he did not take into account the risks when doing business. Li Shalai deduced that the landlord was deliberately hiding the truth, and he was just making fun of him. He was not even afraid of the courts, advising to save on a lawyer, considering that he did not have enough money. But in any case, together with the lease, he transferred all responsibility for the premises to him, especially since at the time of signing the contract, he himself did not know about anything, not knowing that the demolition would be so soon. He was grinning as he tricked Li Shalai like a fool. I only offered him $10,000 in compensation, while his wife offered to discuss the trip. Without even dropping the call, the landlord continued to chat with his wife about their tour to another country, while Li Shalai was worried. Then the man decided to end the call without any decision. Li Shalai didn't even have time to say anything to him, and immediately heard the beeps. The builders gave permission to demolish the building. He clutched the phone in his hands in anger. Now he alone will have to take responsibility for this. But I was going to protect mine anyway. He resolutely stood in front of the huge excavator. Later, Li Shalai started calling everyone he knew to ask for help opening a cafe, but everyone turned him down. He smoked a cigarette inside, realizing that nothing was working out. Li Shalai wrote to the person asking for at least a refund for the 3-year lease. But when he wrote further, he was already removed from friends and the message stopped reaching. At that moment, a voice spoke to him. When he turned his head, there was a girl standing there. Finally, Gaifeng came here. She was his only hope, which made him not give up. Gaifeng was waiting for him to solve the problem. Li Shalai suggested that she start over by selling sets and furniture that could make some money. And if the landlord returns them the money, they will receive several 100,000 more. She stared at him in silence as if thinking of something. Li Shalai hoped to find a better place than this. And because of their reputation, their new cafe would also be popular. But suddenly she became gloomy and wanted to talk about Zhao Lid. Li Shalai immediately became angry, assuming that this jerk was bothering him. But she didn't mean it at all when she was about to break some news. She said sadly that she wanted to leave him. His face turned into shock horror, not expecting this. Li Shalai immediately grabbed her hands, not understanding what went wrong, and begged for more time. He recalled how he solved problems with work and reached a new level. Gai Feng's eyes filled with tears as she confessed that she really wanted to help him. She said that Zhao Lide is a very generous person who gave her a purse worth several $100,000 before the relationship. I showed it to her to prove it. Li Shalai was shocked to realize that she had always accepted his gifts while she was in a relationship with him. She kept silent, feeling ashamed, but no one would turn down the opportunity. It was hard for her to choose because Zhulai was very handsome and had a great body. And Zhao Lide was old, so she only wanted to spend the rest of his life with him, and when he died, she would return to him, offering to keep their relationship a secret. She hugged his hand, declaring her love for him, wanting to show her sincerity. She pretended that she was only doing it for their common good, and Zhao Lide promised to give her $1 million for the relationship. She had never seen such a huge sum when trying to get Zhulai's approval. Li Shalai immediately pushed her away, not intending to let his girlfriend trade her body for his well-being. He immediately wished to see her no more. Abruptly, he shooed her away. Gai Fei just clicked her tongue at him. She started to walk away, deciding not to argue, not wanting to be near the beggar. Li Shalai shouted after her again, shooing her away. A heavy rainstorm started outside. Li Shalai walked in the rain, realizing that there were new cafes everywhere on the street, and now there was terrible competition in this area. He was wondering how much money he could make from selling the furniture, but the world is full of people who are constantly living with debts, paying them off, so it was all temporary. He recalled how he went home and was met by a crowd of guys who demanded debts from him. They pinned him to the wall, intending to collect his debts. Li Shalai walked sadly, lost in thought. His eyes were blank when he opened them. In front of him was a pile of ruins that used to be his cafe. He broke off the tape, stomping straight for it. Li Shalai walked along the pile of bricks, realizing that he had entered a difficult stage in his life, and he did not have any success in entrepreneurship. He sat down on his knees in the rain, not knowing what he had done to deserve this, or how he had come to be so desperate. Zhulai only begged life to stop being bullied, wanting to get back on its feet. He almost took a cigarette in his mouth as he looked up at the sky, threatening that he would take revenge soon. At that moment, a tragedy occurred. His head was covered in blood as he cursed God. Now he was lying on the ground under the rubble, losing consciousness. Construction workers found his body, half of which was torn off. Li Shalai died at the age of 28 as a result of being hit by a crane. He couldn't realize that he was dead. I even thought it was a little funny. He watched the tragedy from the sky as a ghost. Li Shalai couldn't realize that he was watching himself. An ambulance arrived with a stretcher while the police surrounded the area. They began to lift his lifeless body. While his body was being carried away, he watched from the sky with a sneer. He understood that good people get good rewards, but he wasn't on that list. Li Shalai watched the place that was being strangely illuminated. He realized that this was exactly where his cafe had stood before it was demolished. Suddenly, rays of light lit up the entire sky around them. He covered his eyes with his hand, not understanding the reason. At this moment, his body skidded into project activation. The system started showing the bases of different companies. A carousel of memories from his life appeared before his eyes. As Beijing won the right to host the Olympic Games, as housing prices soared, and the opening of the Qinghai-Tibet Road. He didn't expect that he knew so much, but it had nothing to do with him. Suddenly, there were shots of a black hole, islands in the sky, and the appearance of a certain devil. The picture was getting clearer. The road ended abruptly and his foot flew off the cliff. Li Shalai didn't expect this at all and flew down. He screamed in the black abyss as he started to fall. His eyes closed and his teeth clenched in fear. At that moment, a light shone on his eyes and they opened. When the realization came to him, he was sitting in an unknown office next to a guy who was worried about a friend. He looked at the boy carefully. He recognized him as Zhang Ming, fearing that they were both in heaven. Zhang Ming had no idea what Zhulai was talking about, but he was starting to worry more about Zhulai's condition. He immediately stood up from his chair, trying to process everything. Zhulai deduced that he had gone to heaven, and this was his reward for good deeds in life. At this moment, Zhang Ming was trying to get him to sit down, not understanding how he could have fallen asleep on his favorite object. He wanted to know what his friend had dreamed. The teacher called out to him, noticing that he was standing in the middle of the lecture. Zhulai immediately recognized Professor Guo, who was the most respected person in his life, because his family was poor, and only thanks to his help and letters of recommendation, he was able to continue his studies. But good doesn't always win over evil, and in his second year, Professor Guo committed suicide after being accused of harassing a rich woman named Zhang Shueli. She confessed that she did not want to live and wanted to pay for her diploma. Professor Guo swore that he didn't do it while being dragged away from her. As a result, he jumped off the building. Zhulai caught this moment with his own eyes as the most respected person in his life died. He immediately shook his hand, not doubting that he had gone to heaven. Zhulai hugged him tightly, thanking him for helping him study, assuming that he would be reborn soon. He swung the paper at him as Zhulai wished him all the best. And I hit him on the head, not understanding his delirium. He was angry with him that Zhulai had already recorded him as dead. Zhulai couldn't understand what was going on, so Zhang Ming came to his rescue, begging him not to hold a grudge against his friend. He was trying to find out what his friend was doing the day before school, why he was acting like this. Zhang Ming told Zhulai that this was no longer a dream, and they were really in class. He looked at the entire audience, where the students were silently watching their performance. His eyes widened in realization. They sat down and Zhang Ming begged them to sleep at night and continue studying. Zhulai was disappointed that even in heaven, he would have to study. They continued to sit in the lecture hall and listen to Professor Guo. He started to look around and noticed that Xiaoning was also here, realizing that she had also died at such a young age. Zhulai immediately felt a look of disgust from her and didn't understand the reason. Her friend thought that Zhulai was deliberately trying to attract attention, but he didn't even try to look after her properly. Zhulai immediately turned to look at them after hearing the conversation. She immediately saw that he had changed his gaze, and now he was looking at her. She immediately wanted to take Zhulai away, and Xiaoning didn't want to deal with him at all, even though she blushed slightly at his gaze. Xiaoning swore to her friend that Zhulai hadn't given up on her for nothing. Zhang Ming saw that Professor Guo was watching them closely, so he advised them not to turn around again. Professor Guo was simply furious and gave off a gloomy aura. Zhulai was pinched with nerves and was shocked by his stern gaze. He suddenly noticed that there was a book on financial markets and investments in front of him. It didn't feel like heaven at all, and there were too many coincidences with his real life. After all, he took this subject at the university, and it was the same on the blackboard. Zhulai pondered, realizing that it couldn't be hallucination. It only meant that it was like being caught in one of the novels where the main character is reborn. The thought made his heart beat faster. At that moment, a voice in his head interrupted a loud call from the lecture. Everyone started to leave the audience as Zhang Ming interacted with Zhulai. He kept trying to figure out what had happened to his friend, because his behavior was completely different. Zhang Ming understood that Zhulai usually didn't fall asleep like this, no matter how bored he was. So something must have happened to him. Suddenly, he handed Li Zhulai a bill. He immediately started offering his friend help, but Zhulai didn't need the money, and he had enough for this month. Zhang Ming promised that he could be relied upon, and even if he spent a lot of money, he still had enough for everything. And I offered to take the money anyway, considering it an investment in the future. He was informed by his father that Zhulai's parents' business would be booming in the future, and if they ever kicked Zhang Ming out of the door, he was hoping for help from his friend. Zhulai silently took the bill from his hands. He agreed to his suggestion. Zhang Ming patted its head, intending to eat a good mouthful of meat. It was already night outside. Zhulai lay in the dorm bed while Zhang Ming snored in the next bunk. He looked up and couldn't sleep. Suddenly, he realized that he had been reborn in 1998 when he was studying at the university. Abruptly, he burrowed under the covers. After all, it was a very successful gift. He remembered how dark everything had been after his death, and the chronology of all the events got mixed up, and he made a leap in time. But among those memories was a part of the future where the space shuttle was visible. He decided not to think too much about it, because now he had many more important tasks ahead of him. He rolled over, and suddenly an angry figure appeared behind him. Zhang Ming was furious that Zhulai was tossing and turning again. Li Zhulai was terrified of his friend for suddenly appearing behind him, but he accepted that it was time for him to go to bed. He was relaxed that he could now change his fate. Zhang Ming recalled how he looked worried during the day, and now he was playing dumb. Zhulai crawled under the covers, realizing that he had been given a chance to change everything. He wanted to help his loved ones to avoid death. Memories of Gai Feng abandoning him at the worst possible moment, his landlord cheating on him, and the construction workers laughing at his helplessness kept replaying in his mind. His heart was filled with hatred, and he promised to take revenge on the others. And now he can use his knowledge to become the richest person. They went to the auditorium. They sat down at the table. Zhulai decided to plan his actions for the next few years, since he was given the opportunity to be reborn. To the list, he added a goal about buying an apartment, a computer, distributing finances, and using his computer knowledge. Starting in 1998, the Chinese economy will undergo major changes, and after the reforms in 23, housing prices will start to rise sharply. And Li Zhulai was well aware of this, which gave him an advantage. But with his own funds, he does not yet have the opportunity to purchase real estate. He needs initial capital, without which he will not be able to invest in the stock market, the internet and technology, export and retail. Now he needs to accumulate capital in the period from 1998 to 2003. But at least he now has knowledge that can help him a lot. At this moment, he was interrupted by Zhang Ming's voice, who was noticing the obvious oddities in his friend. He stared at him in disbelief as Zhu Lai covered up his piece of paper. Zhang Ming had already read his plans. Not understanding what he was driving at, he thought that Li Shulai wanted to change his specialty, even though Zhang Ming himself planned to enter the market with his own products. Li Shulai explained that he just wanted to plan ahead, since his family is quite poor. Zhang Ming reminded that Shulai boasts good grades, and he will get at least in the bank. He truly believed in their bright future. Li Shulai recalled how after graduating from high school, he wanted to get a job in a bank, but he was simply not accepted due to lack of places. He believed that their parents' small business still had the potential to grow. But they give up too soon and already want to go home to do some farming, so Zhu Lai decided to change their minds. As long as the parents have at least some captain, they will still be able to resume business, and you can turn into a rich man. According to his memories, they didn't have enough perseverance in their previous life, and after 3 years, they returned to the farm. But even with agriculture, they did everything thanks to their father. And even with the average income, they never worried about food and clothing. Zhang Ming understood and decided to ask his father later to analyze the business prospects of Zhu Lai's parents in order to help in some way. I asked him not to worry. Li Shulai clapped him on the shoulder, glad for his friend's help. Zhang Ming recalled that his father had been very busy lately because he had opened a new restaurant in the city center that had not yet gained popularity, so things were going through the roof. Shulai thought abruptly about this restaurant. Zhang Ming thought that Li Shulai might have known about him. At this moment, he remembered that Uncle Zhang's business was very big, but he was unlucky enough to run into bad people. And in the end, Zhang Ming declared bankruptcy and disappeared. He recalled Zhang Ming sobbing as he confessed that he needed to leave the city, wishing his friend luck. Li Shulai couldn't have imagined that it would end so tragically. He advised to pay special attention to liquidity so as not to offend anyone. He had heard that business was like a battlefield, and it was very easy to fall for someone else's trap. Zhang Ming was sure that his father knew all there was to know about this, and he was about to leave school. Li Shulai was going to prove to him that his father would make a mistake and his business would collapse. And then he was going to take revenge on those bad people. But for 3 years, you don't have to worry about anything. Li Shulai recalled how Zhang Ming would buy too much food during lunch and constantly share it with him. He knew about his parents' condition, so he always helped with money. Therefore, Li Shulai wanted to sincerely repay his friend for his help. Night fell and they arrived at the dorm. The shower was steaming. Li Shulai stood under the pressure, pondering his current capabilities, not knowing how to break into the lead. In his previous life, he didn't have enough education to get a good job. But fortunately, he quickly changed the industry. And thanks to his perseverance, he was able to achieve success in programming. He decided to look for something suitable on the internet, which will soon begin to develop rapidly, and you will need to grab any opportunities. In 1999, Yang Feilong will become the founder of Feilong Company, and it will be back on its feet in just 8 months. This will be his first opportunity for promotion. His knowledge from his past life will be very useful, and now he will be a real guru in programming. And if he managed to start cooperating with Feilong, then there would be no reason to worry. When he can accumulate the initial capital, he will quickly reach the very top. He can not only rewrite his own destiny, but also change it for the whole of China. At that moment, he noticed that he had dropped the soap. I quickly ran to pick it up. Suddenly, a realization hit him. He slowly turned back. Zhang Ming was standing behind him in shock, who grinned and suggested that he pick up the soap faster. The shower continued to pour. Li Shulai stood with his back turned, his skin crawling with fear. He was trying to calm Zhang Ming down so that he would stop acting like this. My friend laughed out loud at his own joke. The shower was turned off. Zhang Ming was already about to get dressed, suggesting that Yulai wash up further. But at that moment, he noticed a strange glowing stream in front of his eyes. Zhang Ming turned around at his shout. He thought the steam had changed color abruptly, but it was light. It was the same light he'd seen outside the ruins of his coffee shop, and now it was happening again. Li Shulai immediately pointed it out to his friend, hoping that Zhang Ming could see it too. But Zhang Ming had no idea what he was talking about, worrying about his mental state. At that moment, the light disappeared and Zhu Lai mistook them for hallucinations. He couldn't relax, realizing that Li Shulai was getting weirder, and asked him to relax in the shower. Li Shulai wanted to know what kind of light it was. The day came. In the dining hall, Xiaoning and her friend were walking around the buffet, and they were also discussing Li Shulai's strange behavior. Xiaoning had ordered her not to worry about him anymore, because he kept disappearing and reappearing, so she didn't want to think about him. Her friend had already given up hope of changing her attitude. Xiaoning herself noticed his strange behavior because he was interested in her before and always followed her to extra classes and courses. When she went to the library, he followed close behind and sat down where she saw him. And she began to remember even simple walks when he came to her classes and read a book. Her friends suddenly called out to Xiaoning after noticing the arrival of Li Shulai, who looked like a nerd. He was walking in front of them with a book in his hands. Li Shulai didn't want to just sit around for these 8 months. After all, Yang Feilong didn't take into account some of the problems during the opening of his company, so he started to sort them out on his own. He walked on while the girls waited for some reaction from him. Xiaoning deduced that this was such a game to get her attention. Suddenly, it bumped right into her, causing her to drop her lunch. Her containers fell to the floor. Xiaoning shouted loudly at him along with her friend. Li Shulai immediately started apologizing to her, accidentally bumping into her. She ordered him to stop following her, reminding him that she wasn't interested in him. She started to remind her how much trouble he'd caused her all along. Zhulai apologized for the spoiled food as he picked up its containers. He handed them back, apologizing again. Li Shulai offered to pay for another portion to make up for that one. Xiaoning turned around with a refusal, not wanting to accept money from him. He thought it was a strange reaction, but he didn't try to persuade her. He thought again about Yang Feilong's problems, which were even reported in the media. The girls looked at him in disbelief. They were shocked that he just left. Xiaoning looked at him questioningly, thinking that he was buying her something from the buffet. Her friend began to doubt that he still had an interest in Xiaoning, after all, before he constantly tried to help her. Xiaoning didn't care at all if he lost interest. I furiously went to buy another batch of food. She was sure he was trying to get her attention by pretending to be cold. Li Shulai sat down at the dining room table, still reading a book. While he was eating, Xiaoning spoke to him. She wanted to talk urgently. Zhulai had no idea what she wanted. Xiaoning blushed, realizing that he didn't understand anything. And so I immediately decided to close the topic, angry at him. Li Shulai decided not to argue and ended the conversation. He continued reading the book and munching on his lunch. Xiaoning sat across from him, annoyed that he wasn't paying any attention to her and was just reading a book. At this moment, Li Shulai raised his head in shock. Xiaoning smiled, waiting for him to realize now and speak to her. But she realized that Li Shulai wasn't looking at her at all. She turned around and saw a group of girls. Among them was the same Zhang Xueli. Xiaoning deduced that he had changed his target to her, a girl who was always dressed to the nines and her family was rich and powerful. She tried to change his mind, reminding him what she really is, and it will not be possible to achieve reciprocation from her. Li Shulai explained that she had misunderstood, but it wasn't interesting to explain it to him, so he was about to leave. Xiaoning was shocked by his harsh and rude response. He got up from the table and started to leave, but Xiaoning didn't want to be treated this way. All of his thoughts were filled with hatred for Zhang Xueli. After all, it was because of her that the professor committed suicide in a previous life. Zhang Xueli forced him to take such measures and used her status to bribe the media. Even his wife and son suffered at her hands, and their studies and work became hell. Professor Guo stood on the roof, confessing his loyalty to his wife, how responsible he was for each of his students, how he took care of his son, and adhered to the principles in his work, but the public destroyed him, and he ran out of strength to fight. He had no arguments in his favor, and the name can no longer be returned. He held his head in his hands, swearing that he would never touch his own students. There was a crowd of media standing under the building, and Li Shulai ran over. He pushed past all the guys with cameras to call out to him and talk him out of it. The professor was already standing on the edge, admitting that he only felt sorry for his family, who would have to go through with his loss. At this moment, he jumped down without a doubt. Li Shulai only had time to see the corpse. His eyes filled with horror, and he couldn't say anything. Professor Guo's wife also arrived at the scene with her son and shielded his eyes from the horrifying sight. But later, his wife could not stand this blow and also committed suicide, and the 10-year-old son was left to fend for himself. Tears streamed from his eyes as he lost both of his parents in a matter of days. But the hero of the occasion, Zhang Xueli, was only satisfied with her trick. They were standing on the roof with their group, laughing at Professor Guo's pity. Li Shulai overheard their conversation and how Xueli absolved herself of the blame, because her father would cover for her. She exhaled the cigarette house contentedly, condemning Professor Guo for choosing to leave this world. His face darkened, wishing that Xueli would die instead of the professor. Meanwhile, in reality, he was grabbed by the arm. It was Xiaoning who tried to draw his attention to her words, but he missed everything. He still kept thinking about Yueli to get back at her properly. Xiaoning trembled at his stern gaze. Li Shulai knew very well what Xiaoning was thinking, and even though she mistakenly thought that he was in love with her and was now looking at other girls, she couldn't allow it because of jealousy. Xiaoning started yelling at him in shame, trying to deny the truth. He decided to ask her if she knew the most important points in the financial industry. Xiaoning immediately mentioned basic knowledge, foresight, and perseverance. But in reality, this was not the case. The main thing was liquidity, without which the market simply would not exist. In the future, she will learn about the masters of finance, and successful work depends on risk management and liquidity optimization. This knowledge is useful everywhere, whether it's stocks or bonds. Xiaoning couldn't understand what he was talking about, but it didn't sound like nonsense. Before leaving, Li Shulai advised him not to just read books all day long. And sometimes you need to think about more serious things. Xiaoning was left at a loss as to what he was even talking about. She thought he was looking down on her, and she didn't like it. At that moment, a realization came to her. Xiaoning turned to Li Shulai in anger, but he was no longer in front of her. Her face was frozen in shock. She started complaining out of anger that she couldn't say a word because of her stupor, and she was going to tell him next time. Li Shulai walked out of the university building. He knew that Xiaoning didn't understand anything about this world yet, but in her previous life, he hadn't noticed her flippancy at all. In her memories, Xiaoning's friend had pushed her to go to Shulai, telling her to choose honest guys. But Xiaoning was rude to him because she didn't like his harassment, and she wasn't going to keep him at all. Li Shulai was disappointed with her behavior in her previous life, as he didn't notice her terrible attitude and was blindly charmed. He recalled with a red face how he had enjoyed her gaze on Zhang Ming, thinking that she liked him. But now the servitude was over. Now he won't make a fool of himself, just a business without love. He knew that Yang Feilong would soon become very popular, so there would be a lot of women hanging around. But he didn't know if looks, flaws, and low status were important. But in any case, he had to gain strength to hide behind power. Li Shulai was going to give up flirting completely so that he could put all his strength into wealth and power and achieve whatever he wanted. He combed his bangs, already looking forward to life as if in a dream. Li Shulai was already flying above the ground like a god in his dreams. Later, in the men's dorm, Zhang Ming grabbed his hand to go to his house while his mom was gone, especially since he wanted to watch the final match. Li Shulai had completely forgotten that today was France's game against Brazil, and Brazil will lose. But he refused because he hadn't finished his assignments yet. He has already seen this game, so now he is not interested, and it is worth spending this time on useful things. Zhang Ming still couldn't figure out what had happened to his friend. He started shaking it, reminding me that this is the World Cup, which takes place every 4 years and you can't miss it. He started to think that he was going to use his brain to get Xiaoning's attention, but Zhu Lai immediately rejected his theory. Zhang Ming even started to worry that he was doing something forbidden, but that wasn't the case. Then he offered to place a bet, and the loser would wash the socks that were piling up under his mattress. Li Shulai wasn't afraid of an argument at all, but now it was clear where the stench in the room had come from. Zhang Ming exclaimed that he was confident that the Brazilian team would win, but Zhu Lai was going to put a dry bet on the French team. The guy was shocked by his self-confidence. He wondered if Zhu Lai wanted to wash his clothes so badly, and maybe this was a way to pick him up. Zhu Lai immediately sent him to hell, intending to win. Zhang Ming let out a loud laugh as he was sure of his victory. Betting has started to flourish, and the World Cup has a lot to show for the future. Zhang Ming hoped that one day it would be held in their country as well. He shouted, wanting to get rich overnight. Li Shulai already knew about this, and when he was interested in football, he always thought about the final score. And it was easy for him to predict the results. In the year 2000, a general lottery was held in China, with the help of which one could easily get rich, and there was a very high chance. But his rebirth did not cancel the butterfly effect. He needs to think through his steps in advance so as not to make things worse for himself, and he urgently needs to find out what this golden light is. After all, he was usually unlucky in this life, and he needs to know in advance where to make the right move. He only hoped that in this life his fate would change, but no one canceled the bets. They always have a share of winnings. Li Shulai noted that betting has a very high risk. Although it is not harmful to dream, the reality can be tragic. He got up from his chair, knowing that this was hard to put into practice. Li Shulai realized that Zhang Ming was looking at everything through rose-colored glasses and only sees those who have become rich, but forgets about those who have gone bankrupt in the same way. Moreover, they were just poor students who might win a couple of times by luck. But if they won in a row, people would start accusing them of cheating. And he immediately warned about the arrest and inspections, and about hatred from others in case of victory. And then before you know it, they're drowning him in a sack. And even with an insane amount of wealth, no one is immune from this, and they can be killed right the next day. Zhang Ming frowned in fear and began to imagine everything he had heard. His entire family could be killed, and with the money available, that chance was high. He started to shake, not expecting such awareness in this regard. Li Shulai put a hand on his shoulder. Now he could see him in his eyes, like a sage who advised him to absorb only positive energy. Zhang Ming tearfully swore that he would be honest and righteous. He thought that Zulai must have encountered something like this. Otherwise, how could he have such a rich knowledge? Zhang Ming chuckled and hugged his friend, thinking that he had become like this because of another rejection from his girlfriend. Li Shilai directly admitted that he didn't have time for falling in love, and he advised his friend to focus on himself, because the wealth will not be with him all his life. He clenched his fist in anger, not understanding what had gotten into his friend. After a while, Zhang Ming was about to leave the room with his things, asking if Shulai definitely didn't want to join in, but he confidently refused. Zhang Ming thought it was strange, because no kid wouldn't give up beer and soccer. Suddenly, it dawned on him that Zulai might have problems in a family that doesn't have money, so he tries to find part-time jobs. So he decided to just be there as an understanding friend, and finally clarified that you should not hesitate to ask for help. The door to the room slammed loudly as Zhang Ming left. Li Shilai regretted that they had separated in the past life, and Zhang Ming would definitely lend him a helping hand in that situation. Zhang Ming stood outside the door and wished his friend luck. And Zulai was going to do business. He went to the computer science classroom. He tapped the keyboard, enjoying the result. After all, I was finally able to connect. Thanks to innovations, it had no difficulties connecting, and it was the most popular software at that time. His diligence paid off, and right after class, he went here to write his own program. It was unexpected for him that the current computer was so useful. He took the disk out of the drive, and slowly he began to leave, not even expecting such success. In his hands lay the disc that was his stepping stone to success. In the hallway, meanwhile, Zhang Shuili was hugging one of the teachers, trying to seduce him. Li Shilai witnessed what was happening. He was simply disgusted by her behavior. Zhang Shuili happily persuaded the teacher to correct her grades, asking him not to tell anyone about it. The teacher stood desecrated, horrified by her behavior. Li Shilai didn't expect that she would use these methods on everyone to achieve her goal. In his memories, he overheard a conversation between his friends. The girls had heard the story about Professor Guo, who was rumored to be the culprit in that situation, but they were afraid that it might be another lie of Yueli's. The second girl was sure that Julie was like a beautiful flower. But money wasn't the most important thing. She was in a powerful family, as if there was something else involved. My friend wanted to know more details. She agreed to tell everything only under the pretext of a secret. One of her roommates told her that Julie often doesn't return to the dorm, and even the teachers don't know her exact address. And Professor Guo was the one who suffered the most. Because of her lies, he had to leave this world. Those who did not succumb to her deception and temptation fell under a wave of threats and began to panic. In the previous case, Wang Huang had to drop out of school because of her. Teachers had to listen to her, because teachers sometimes perceive students as their own children, so they try to protect them, especially since she knows how to put pressure on everyone's weak point. The girl was furious that no one had revealed her true identity yet. But in reality, everyone was just afraid to take risks after the incident with Professor Guo. At this moment, a gloomy Li Shulai appeared behind them. The girls wanted to go somewhere else so that no one would interfere with them, but Li Shulai grabbed her arm. And he asked me to tell you more about it. There were tears in her eyes from fear, but she decided to tell everything. Now it was clear that another teacher had fallen into her net. No one would have thought that a beautiful girl would turn out to be a nasty snake that rules everyone as she wants. But Li Shulai had the ability to bring her down from the heavens to earth. For now, he had other goals. He needed to contact young Fei Long as soon as possible. He didn't want to waste his energy on her just yet, wanting to get her on track. But he was still spying on her, already planning how he would deal with her. Li Shulai wanted to take revenge on her for Professor Guo's death, which she arranged with money. He promised to help her sink to the bottom forever. Later, Zulai returned to the dorm. He started walking forward head first. In front of him was a girl who was running at high speed. At this moment, he only managed to raise his head, and they bumped into each other. The unknown girl fell to the floor, dropping all her books. Li Shulai rubbed his head from the impact, wondering what had happened. He immediately got up to help her up. But she didn't ask for help and wanted to manage on her own. As they picked up the books, their hands touched. The girl's face immediately flushed. So she pulled her hand back so it wouldn't happen again. Li Shulai apologized again for not noticing her. The girl did not hold a grudge, admitting that she was in a hurry. At that moment, he recognized her as Liao Kexin. She was the author of a novel that was famous in his previous life, and he adored it himself, and her first book sold millions of copies. She was good at describing the life of urban youth, and her work focuses not only on the development of love, but also on other aspects. She had a great talent, being able to describe and reveal the character of the characters in a few words. Li Shulai recalled seeing it in his school yearbook and danced with happiness. Kexin didn't expect him to recognize her. At that moment, he realized that she wasn't a star in this world yet, so he should restrain his emotions. He confessed that he had seen her article and started praising her handwriting. Li Shulai also saw him receiving an award on stage and complimented her appearance, not knowing how appropriate it was. Kexin immediately started hiding her hair behind her ear, embarrassed by his words. He took a closer look at her while he still had the chance. In the photo shoot from the press conferences, she looked very elegant, but in real life she turned out to be much simpler and more gentle. He didn't expect to meet his idol in his youth at all. Li Shulai hid his true emotions like a true fan. But I thought that chasing a star wouldn't be such a waste of time. So I immediately offered to help deliver the books. Kexin started to politely decline, but he immediately explained that it wasn't flirting or anything like that, just wanting to help. He admitted that he is a big fan and therefore a little excited. In his previous life, he didn't have time to meet her because she committed suicide due to depression, and it happened right in her own home. Headlines were filled with the death of novelist Liao Kexin. Her mother didn't even realize the severity of her depression, seeing it as attention-grabbing. Her brother thought her job was absurd and how she made money from it. Kexin thanked him for his sincere help. Therefore, Zulai immediately started escorting her to the study. He understood that she is a very sensitive and vulnerable girl, but her family does not appreciate her at all. Especially in the future, she will become a popular writer, so you need to change her fate. Li Shulai grinned, intending to get to know her better, intending to take advantage of the resources. Meanwhile, on the territory of the university, there was a pleasant breeze outside as they walked along the path. Li Shulai told her about his cousin, who was also a writer, and even won a county award for writing. But he wasn't as lucky as Kexin, because she had a younger brother. Her family was patriarchal, so she was not allowed to develop further writing, and she left for a regular job. After saying that, he waited for her to say something. She was shocked by his words, and she admitted that she also has a younger brother. Her face immediately darkened. Li Shulai immediately apologized, not thinking it would sound rude. He had heard from his sister that she would fight against injustice, so he tried to motivate Yi Kexin to work harder. He had heard on the news that she was the eldest child in the family, and the demand was much higher. Then her writing career was just beginning. In a coffee shop, she met with a man who asked to support their project, but it had to be completed by the end of January. He was handing her a job offer that rarely came up. The man promised that they would provide all the resources, offering an advance payment of 20%. In the end, she wasn't allowed to stay and work on the project, so the opportunity was lost. Her mother would start yelling at her, telling her to quit. She didn't see any point in her work, and even demanded most of her salary. Her mother ordered her to marry an old geezer who would dress her and feed her, which would help their family. Kexin was a good person compared to her brother who spent all the family's money, but her mother still came up with such a disgusting idea. Tears were streaming from her eyes, and she didn't understand what she had done to deserve such treatment from her own mother. In desperation, she finally gathered strength and quit. Due to being busy at a regular job, she interrupted her writing career. And because of this, she missed a very good opportunity in development, and the person who replaced her became very famous. The windows now had a picture of the guy who'd taken all the awards in her stead. She stared at the ad in silence, knowing it had to be her. Every day she was overtaken by routine, and the money that she earned by hard work, she gave to her family, not being able to spend it on her business. She cried inside, because after paying the rent, there was no money left at all, because of which my mother continued to be angry. Due to physical abuse and pressure, she developed a prolonged depression, but later she finally found solace in writing. Despite her tardiness, she was still able to go out in the writer's world. She was interviewed in various ways, calling her an unsurpassed writer. But such times did not last long. The family still did not have enough of her stable earnings, and her mother began to threaten her with suicide so that she would buy her brother a car and a house. My brother went into gambling, but my mother still blamed Kexin for everything. My mother knew for a fact that she had money from the books she had written. She constantly thought about leaving the family and made every effort to do so. At that moment, Kexin looked up. All her fans in line were shocked. Her mother came dressed all in tatters, pretending that Liao Kexin had abandoned her family, causing them to starve and wander. Everyone immediately thought that she had abandoned her parents and was callous. Kexin saw the taunts from them, how they called her cruel. Because of the accusations on the internet and the pressure of the family, they did not go away even after her explanation. So she gave up. But if it wasn't for all of these factors, she might still be alive. Li Shulai hesitantly asked for her email address. She hadn't expected this question at all. Shulai really wanted to keep in touch with her, but he was afraid that she would get rich in the future and forget about him. But he was still willing to even brag about the great writer's contacts. Kexon didn't understand why he believed in her success so much, but I immediately felt a strong support from him, which I needed all my life. She immediately wrote down her email address on a piece of paper, and she said that she checks it once a week in the computer science classroom. At that time, the internet was not yet so developed, so not everyone had computers. Later, he offered to see her off. She asked me to just call her Kexon and thanked me for today. July accepted her request, but he asked her not to give up writing because she has a great future ahead of her. He begged her not to succumb to the pressure of society, continuing to go forward. Kexon smiled brightly, intending to do just that. At this moment, Li Shilai said his goodbyes and left. Kexon waved after him. It has returned to the computer science audience, because in this era there were no phones yet, and instant messaging is not yet so popular. He still had a year to wait. Yang Filong's business started developing quite recently, and its head now lives in another city, and now it's time to change the plan. He sighed, afraid that Kexon wouldn't respond to his message. She sat down at the computer to check her email and saw a new message. Kexon immediately clicked on it, and there Li Shilai tried to motivate her again, praising her beautiful work and how he felt magic from ordinary words. He begged her to believe in her abilities so that she could become famous. She smiled softly and blushed at his flattery, but I felt a little uneasy, realizing that he strongly insisted on continuing writing. Kexon didn't understand why he liked her work so much. The literature consultant told Kexon that she still had a lot to learn before taking such difficult papers. Not only did she lack emotions, but there were a lot of logical holes in the papers. She remembered how her papers had been thrown around her office, telling her to stop writing. But no one saw her efforts, and perhaps the reader will have a completely different assessment of her work. Therefore, she was willing to work hard and go for her goal despite the difficulties. She sent him her message. An immediate response came in, and Zulai asked if she was in class right now. Kexon was surprised by the quick response, assuming that he was also in the computer science classroom right now. Then she herself suggested that they have lunch together. And Li Shilai immediately agreed, going to meet in front of the lab. Later, they met at the designated place. Kexon handed him the papers with a couple of excerpts that she had written recently and wanted to hear his opinion. Li Shilai immediately recognized the novel, Motes in the Heart, which she started writing in 1998. He was sweating with nerves when he held such a thing in his hands, where old phrases and sayings were collected. For this book, she received many of her own awards and was almost nominated for a Nobel Prize. Kexon was starting to get nervous that things were really bad in her job. But Li Shilai didn't understand why such a negative opinion came from. Kexon admitted to her teacher's opinion that he immediately rejected her work, so she wanted to hear from him as well. But she really liked the job, even though it looked bad from the outside. Li Shilai immediately recalled that in the interview, she had told him about the teacher who rejected her work, calling it too boring. Because of this, she almost gave up, but she liked her work too much, so she went to the publishing house on her own and gave the work away. He honestly said that the work is very good, but it remains to refine some points, and people who love this style will appreciate the book, and immediately advised to read The Great Gatsby, which at first was called ambiguous, but after the First World War, public opinion changed. Kexon smiled brightly, immediately asking him for some advice. He was afraid that his words might change her style or make it worse. Li Shilai steeled himself to say the right words. He gave her advice that she should follow her original plans without paying any attention to anyone. Li Shilai considered all people different, so he couldn't fully appreciate the work in progress yet. Kexon began to think that he was trying to smooth things over and imply that she was a bad writer. Li Shilai wasn't a professional in this matter, and he didn't want to mislead her. Moreover, she should not rely so much on the opinion of others because it is better to have her own. And if she likes her work, then it's good enough. It is better to continue doing what you like, and you should not change your attitude to work because of someone else. Eventually, she will have readers who will appreciate her work. It may not be in the standard of literary critics, but the hearts of many readers will definitely be touched. And Li Shilai, who was already a big fan of it, is an example of this. Kexon didn't expect to hear such wise words from him. In him, she saw her own ray of hope and the man who finally understood her. Her eyes lit up with motivation and happiness as she was encouraged to continue. She paused, remembering other people's opinions. Her mother constantly criticized her for writing because it did not bear any fruit while her second cousin paid for her studies. Her father had ordered her to learn to do laundry and cook instead of reading stupid books. Her younger brother judged her for her looks because the other guys who were sisters were so much cooler. Li Shilai advised her to adapt, and then everything will work out. And in the end, it will definitely be published. Kexon snapped out of her thoughts, realizing that she had hope now. With a bright smile, she thanked him for his faith in her. At this moment, Xiaoning saw their conversation. Her friend recognized Li Shilai immediately. She remembered that he hadn't spoken to her in a very long time, and she was afraid that what he said was true. The friends started laughing that his liking had passed, and now Zulai was walking with other girls. So I also fell for a village girl who doesn't look like a student. She didn't understand how anyone could trade Yao Ning for her. Zhao Ning immediately gagged her, pretending that she didn't care about him. Her friend winked, knowing she was jealous. She denied everything with a smile, dismissing it all to wild fantasies. Li Shulai slowly walked forward, but he could clearly see Xiao Ning, who was constantly following him and was also talking loudly. He was furious that she had interrupted his date, so he was also insulted by Kexin. But fortunately, she didn't hear or react. Li Shulai asked her to wait a moment for him to say hello. He whirled around and steamed, so angry was he. But at this moment, he was surprised. Xiao Ning and her friend were standing at a very distant distance, even though it felt like they were right next to each other. Her friend noticed that Shulai had turned around and once again made fun of her friend, who was already harassed. A loud voice pierced his ears. He could hear it all very clearly again, but they were very far away from him. Li Shulai decided to give up on them, not seeing the need to get into a conflict, but something was bothering him. He closed his eyes and felt the light around him. Even the sound of the wind was different. He could hear the sounds of classes, understanding every word the teacher said. Shulai could hear the sounds of the dining hall in every person's voice. He opened his eyes abruptly, realizing that he had gained a new ability after being reborn. Li Shulai didn't understand where he got such a rumor, but it wasn't bad. Kexin didn't understand what he was doing there. He pretended that he just decided not to say hello, since he sees them so often. In his head, he imagined getting different abilities. He suggested that she hurry to the dining room before everything in the buffet was sold out. Kexin agreed with him and they moved on. Several whole days passed. He walked into the room, greeting Yang Feilong. Feilong stood on the stage in front of a crowd of people, talking about the rapid development of the internet and the advent of the digital era. Now the opportunities have been multiplied and progress does not stop. He firmly believed that business in the future will change a lot thanks to new technologies and the internet or artificial intelligence. All this will change business and everyday life. The crowd was fiercely supportive of his performance, and Li Shulai had no doubts about his ability to warm up the crowd. Feilong was very good at presenting a picture on stage, something that not everyone could do. He promised that progress would help them overcome regional, time, and language barriers, and wanted to ensure uninterrupted communication around the world. According to him, life will soon become much easier and everyone will be able to enjoy convenient services. All the people praised his speech, regarding him as the new world overlord. Li Shulai knew that it wasn't done that easily. He abruptly started walking towards the stage. He shouted at Feilong, trying to refute his methods. The problem was that Feilong would set himself up one day. People around him started shouting at him, mistaking it for threats. Feilong, on the contrary, took advantage of it. They tried to call security to get Shulai out of the hall. Li Shulai admitted that he knew about his secret thoughts and invited him to his place if Feilong wanted to deal with his questions. He was shocked to think about his words. At this moment, Shulai just turned around and started to leave. The man tried to explain to Feilong that this is just another fanatic who wants fame, so it's not worth wasting your ambition. But surprisingly, he was strangely interested in the stranger. He found him interesting and similar to himself in his youth, and even despite his influence in the crowd, he still expressed his opinion. The man was shocked by his positive reaction. Li Shulai had already left Yang Feilong's office, but he followed him, demanding an explanation. He felt that Shulai seemed very bold and purposeful, who didn't try to attract the public's attention. Li Shulai knew full well that Feilong would follow him. When he turned around, Feilong couldn't figure out what was wrong with his appearance. Li Shulai knew that he wanted to introduce technology into the industrial enterprise, although there would be no problems at the initial stage, because China had an advantage in the form of a demographic dividend. But people didn't have much money yet, and few people would choose their company over a cheap one. Feilong opened his mouth, unable to say anything. He hoped it wasn't some nerd who was going to check this information. Li Shulai suggested that he could invest a larger amount and put the price even higher, but it was better to do otherwise and not invest much. He advised that it is better to establish direct contact with consumers, then he will quickly receive feedback and increase the quality of products. And thanks to customer satisfaction, he can expand the market. He had no doubt that Feilong was on the right track right now and asked him to continue striving to change the world. Feilong remained silent, not understanding how this was possible. But tears immediately came to his eyes because of such a strong belief in his cause. For a long time, he worried and worried when he told all his partners that they thought he was too picky. But he didn't expect to be completely understood by a single young man. This was Li Shulai's plan for him to think about supporting them. He handed him the disc with the program he had recently written and decided to give it to him and let him make the decision whether to use it or not. He also advised him not to be squeamish if he wants to get more opportunities and promised that later he will understand everything himself. He only wanted Fei Long to personally take a look at the contents of the disc. The second step in his plan was to trick the person into a trap. His eyes sparkled, and he didn't expect a stranger to give him such a gift. Li Shalai didn't see anything wrong with it. Fei Long thought that he might cheat him, and why not sign a contract or agreement, but it was too long for Zulai. According to him, a real businessman will never cheat. Moreover, this program was still in the demo version, so I suggested just enjoying it. Li Shalai was about to leave, but Fei Long started to stop him. He couldn't understand why the stranger had chosen him. Shalai explained that he was a man who worked for the good of his country and people, and that China would gain strength through him. Li Shalai turned around again without finishing the conversation, but he paused again, wanting to add something else. Fei Long knew that he would say something else and waited patiently. He turned around and introduced himself. Fei Long was disappointed, realizing that he expected too much from the youngsters. Later, loud cheering sounds were coming from the office. It was Fei Long who sat down at the computer and opened the program from the disk, not understanding how it was even possible to develop such code, so also leave a comment. He realized that the stranger was a rampaging genius, and now it was imperative to cooperate with him. His eyes sparkled at the program. He almost hugged the computer with happiness, and his screen had the literal sophistication of the time. Fei Long got up from his chair, starting to laugh viciously. Now his company will definitely know no barriers. It was already evening. Li Shalai was eating in the student cafeteria with Fei Long, and the girls noticed that they had seen the man somewhere else. Zulai didn't expect him to be able to find it so quickly. He was surprised that Fei Long was able to open the program to the end and was able to find him in the cafeteria. Even though it took him 3 days to find him, he wanted to expose the guy, knowing that he was quite unusual. Zulai knew that the man would definitely go looking for him, so as not to miss this opportunity. Fei Long realized that this was logical, but his head wasn't always clear. He immediately invited him to join his business empire. Fei Long started to present his technology, which will soon be rapidly developing, and would like to get help from him. Zulai didn't want to hear such courteous speeches after all. He was different from the hot-blooded young guys. Fei Long was shocked, knowing that it wouldn't work on him. It was a direct accusation that he couldn't be lured away by such nonsense. Fei Long thought about it for a long time and was already beginning to doubt that this was a talented student with an ordinary family. But Zulai didn't want to let him go empty-handed since he was here. So I reached into my briefcase where the CD was. He handed him more papers, along with the disc. Fei Long lit up, hoping that this would be the full version of that program. But when he understood, his hands began to shake. This was a great opportunity to develop Fei Long, like the key to all technology, and the guy gives it to him. These sheets were like travel maps for the Fei Long ship, and the map has a path to treasure. Zulai did not doubt his mental abilities, but asked him not to ask questions about where he learned to do this. He only asked for trust if he wanted to go into the future. He got up from his chair, and since Fei Long would find him useful after that, then he would know what to do. Fei Long's eyes were blinded by a bright light. Zulai was about to leave and wished him success in his development, and he just asked me to benefit the country. He turned around and finished his monologue. Fei Long was incredibly happy and filled with a strange feeling. It was December 31st, 1998. Everyone on TV was looking at Fei Long. Zhang hugged Zulai. After all, they were both following the development of Fei Long, which already had several hundred million investments. All the people were convinced that the internet is the future. Li Shalai noticed how fast progress was being made, which could change the course of history. Zhang knew that Fei Long was in the same city as them, and he wondered if his business would continue to thrive even at the end of their studies. Li Shalai didn't see anything wrong with early progress. It only meant that the popularity would be much higher. Finally, April of 1999 arrived. Shalai gave Professor Guo his diploma. At this moment, loud high-heeled footsteps could be heard from behind. The bag slammed down on the table. It was the disgruntled Zhang Shuili, who demanded a confession from the professor who had deliberately embarrassed her and demanded an evaluation of her diploma. In fact, she spent $2,000 to get it written to her, but the professor rejected it. She couldn't stand scientific research, and she wanted to deal with her thesis already. Professor Guo graded her thesis sternly, which looked good at first glance, but you can see a lot of holes inside, and if he accepted such a job, it wouldn't be fair to other students. Zhang Shuili was shocked that he refused to accept her job. Professor Guo stood his ground and could not allow a diploma of this quality. Zhuili simply resigned herself and looked at him with a menacing gaze. She took her bag and ordered me to wait for her to bring the modified work. She snorted as Zulai watched. He only asked Professor Guo to be careful with Shuili because all those who offended her didn't end well. But Professor Guo, while reading his thesis, had already found the questions on the first page. Zulai laughed awkwardly, trying to divert his attention. He decided to get out before he found a bunch more bugs in his work. I quickly took my diploma, intending to fix everything. He walked down the street, remembering that the prom season was about to start. Li Shilai only hoped that he would be able to graduate safely. Suddenly, Yang Feilong, who had come here on Zhang Ming's advice, was standing in his way. He tried again to invite him to join the company. Feilong promised that they had changed the technology and everything would be fine now. The company's value had skyrocketed, and it was already clear that it was going to be the greatest. He was going to give him all the rights to become a shareholder and promised him wealth. But Zulai just shook his head in silence, refusing. Yang Feilong was upset that he couldn't get his consent. Then he asked for his requirements to give him whatever he wants. Zulai only asked for a thank you note and was going to open a coffee shop after high school, asking for a house on 99th Street. This stung Feilong right to the heart because Zulai chose an old house instead of money. But Zulai himself didn't see anything wrong with it. He still stood there with his mouth hanging open, knowing that he was very much mistaken about him. Young Feilong didn't expect that there were still young people who were so calm about wealth. Now Zulai looked even bigger and taller in his eyes because he shared the necessary data for the development of the project, and he did not require a penny. And even after the peak of the company, he remains the same, unwavering. Feilong took up his request responsibly, making sure to buy him a building. Even so, he wanted to know what secrets were behind it. His assistant was about to return to her seat. Feilong had ordered her to buy a house on 99th Street, intending to repay $3 million more just for his kindness. When the company expanded, he was going to offer him the position of director. After all, he himself was acting for the good of the people, and Zulai could even help people more than him. Now Zulai was an incentive to expand his company. He arrived at 99th Street, and I already got the paperwork for a new house that was right next to the road. Zulai decided to accept this gift so that his efforts would not be in vain. There was a lesson going on. The professor said that the defensive theses will take place in early June, but many students have not yet completed their projects, so he asked everyone to prepare. The students only had 3 months left, and everyone hoped that they would be able to graduate successfully. Everyone was like a zombie, screaming for help, unable to do anything but study. Professor Guo finished the class. He quickly left the audience. The friend turned to Zhueli, asking if she had talked to the professor about the diploma. She didn't understand why she should treat ordinary papers like this, and student papers weren't so golden. She continued to shout insults after him. Yaoning overheard their conversation and explained that Professor Guo takes care of the students, which is why he checks the papers so carefully and tries to correct mistakes. She understood that after graduation, they would all become specialists, and they needed to be able to cope with difficulties. Zhueli didn't expect a different answer from the excellent student, but she advised me to be careful and take care of myself, while it emanated a dark aura. Xiaoning understood that everything in the world is decided by money, so Zhueli was so cheeky, so she decided to just score. Her friend called Xiaoning to the exit, and they left the classroom. Zhueli was approached by a classmate who was wondering if she might be left without a degree. Companies in their time began to pay attention to the diploma, although her family is rich, but if she leaves without a diploma, she will waste 4 years in vain. Another took up his idea, and everyone advised her to be gentle with the professor because he was principled and not everyone can graduate. Julie wasn't going to put it off, not seeing anything complicated in the thesis, so she would think of something. But a plan for revenge against Professor Guo was already forming in her mind. Everyone started praising her steadfastness and quick wit. Li Shilai picked up the backpack from his desk, knowing that a diploma was useless if you didn't have the skills. And he knew how rotten Julie was inside, so no amount of money would save her. Sometimes the wind changes direction, and it is far from certain that her family will continue to have the same influence. She was offended by his words and was going to continue the argument. But Zulai didn't want to take lessons from the stupidest girl in the group, as she knew very well. The guys started whispering to each other, not expecting him to say anything, but they wanted to protect Zhueli. One of the guys thought that since his family wasn't rich, he abruptly started studying, thinking that Zhueli had hurt his self-esteem. She continued to brag about her family's wealth, knowing that he would never earn that kind of money. Zhueli laughed at him, telling him not to approach her. Zhang Ming stopped his friend from answering so that he wouldn't stoop to her level. Zhueli knew that there was no point in talking to her any further, since she hadn't even managed to commit the same mischief as in her previous life. But even with her around, he felt sick as she solved her problems through the shortest paths. He turned to her, remembering that her father only had $5 million and didn't go any further than their city. The guys were shocked because the amount was still large and continued to insult him. Zhueli reminded her that there are many people in the world who are cooler than her father, reminding her that someone can use her own methods. He grinned as he prepared to bury it in the ground. Zhueli was going to wait until it sank to the bottom. She clenched her fist, looking down, not understanding why he was so angry. Shulai just went with Zhang Ming to the canteen to eat lunch. He hugged his friend, praising him for his actions, but Shulai didn't understand this. Shulai abruptly ran after them, shouting at their backs. Zhang Ming was trying to warn him when she pulled her hands towards him. She wanted to punch him in the face, but Zulai managed to dodge. Shulai didn't expect this, so he grabbed her wrist. He ordered them to stop shouting. At that moment, it was as if an energy shield had appeared around him, which pushed her far away. The guys caught Zueli, who was flying with a cry. Everyone saw their fight, seeing her try to attack Shulai, but he didn't have time to react. But they didn't understand why she decided to do this. The guys tried to help her by asking her condition while she was lying on the floor and shaking. There were tears in her eyes, and she couldn't understand what exactly had just happened. Zhang Ming was delighted with his friend when they arrived at the dorm. He couldn't believe his friend would do such a thing, and his eyes were sparkling. He didn't know when Shulai had learned such a thing, but to be honest, he didn't know, and it felt strange. Zhang Ming was disappointed in his answer and looked at him with disbelief. Li Shulai remembered that they still couldn't eat, so he called them to the dining hall. Zhang Ming knew that he was trying to change the subject every time. It was already dark outside and the street lamps were lit up. He remembered the golden light of the coffee shop after his death, and that golden light in my soul when it came out of nowhere. He had been thinking too much lately, and today's scene completely put him in a stupor. He didn't even know how he could react. In his eyes, her movements were too slow, so he easily dodged her. He even felt that his body was about to be hit. He knew it wasn't just coincidences, and it wasn't science, but he decided to visit the library tomorrow. The next day came, and he went to the university library. There were many books on his desk. He read them carefully to make sense of himself. Ancient literature spoke of a mysterious phenomenon called restoration. It was created by the renewal of the connection between heaven and earth. There were mortals who had spiritual roots and could absorb energy through meditation and open new gates for their cultivation, becoming stronger. A person could literally merge with nature, the heavens and the earth, gaining immortality. There were different clans that had their own cultivation methods. One clan had cultivation with a sword, but the main difficulty in cultivation is work, where you need to constantly strive. It was all just a legend, and you shouldn't rely on it, but it's still not scientifically proven. Li Shulai felt that he was no longer an ordinary person, and the book could explain to him if there were still hermits out there trying to cultivate. He didn't know if all of this really existed, but his rebirth was also difficult to explain. But he still has a chance when he can find out everything, and now he will try to do it. It was already 6 o'clock in the morning. Li Shulai was about to start practicing when the sun rose. He started a small lesson on cultivation, which requires improving your body, regulating your energy, and developing your intelligence. This process is similar to building a foundation, which requires a lot of patience so that it is strong and reliable. He went to the student park, and he sat down under a tree, intending to take a lotus position and calm down. He exhaled slowly, trying to concentrate. And he was even beginning to get it. He felt like he was gaining control. He decided to continue, intending to do this for 9 weeks. As time passed, the sun was just coming out, illuminating the entire park. It began to shine directly on his tree. It was 29 degrees outside, and he didn't know if it was supposed to be that hot or not. But there was no way for him to back down after all. He had already set foot on the path of cultivation. He felt like a real cultivator now. When he got out of the pose, he felt relief all over his body. His fatigue and drowsiness disappeared in an instant, and he was going to be back tomorrow. But a second later, the unpredictable happened. He was overtaken by a crowd of old people who came to play sports in the park, wondering at his motivation to come so early. Everyone started advertising their services, offering their granddaughter, or helping with their posture. Li Shulai decided to leave quickly, and he took off quickly while the old men tried to persuade him to come back tomorrow. He barely escaped and returned to the square. As he tried to relax, he looked up. There were active dances on the square, and in 2 years, this type of dance will become one of the most popular. Older women danced to active music, and they genuinely enjoyed the rhythms. A group that loved to dance to this music came on stage. At this time, dancing in the square takes place spontaneously, but soon Chinese society will begin to age, so the social activity of the elderly will begin to develop. Therefore, it is not a very bad idea to help pensioners organize sports venues for them in the future. He was going to come back tomorrow and start working on a plan, and he quickly left the park while being watched. One of the old men felt a similar energy from him. Later, he went to the airport. He was standing at the airport, trying to make a phone call, while a voice announced the boarding of a flight to Yanzhou. All the people were looking at him with interest. They realized that Shulai was a big shot because his phone looked very expensive. The phone was picked up by his secretary, who picked up several apartments for him. He said that he was now preparing to land, asking to call back in 3 hours. Li Shulai resolutely left for the flight, intending to fly to Yunju. The plane began to fly away. Some time has passed, and he has already arrived. He came to the real estate agency. The receptionist said that the market value was $1 million and offered to arrange an installment plan. She immediately noticed how young he was, but he already had a phone, which showed his condition. Li Shulai took the papers, intending to think about her offer. Now it was a more favorable offer, because soon the market value of houses will increase tenfold, and the realtor picked up a good home. But over time, real estate will only get worse. He immediately took out a gold card, deciding to pay for it right away. The girl's eyes lit up at the brightness of his card with that amount. Everyone looked at him in shock, realizing that this was some kind of major. The girl was sure that there was no point in risking buying such a building. While he was signing the papers, everyone around him was judging his choice, because this was the old town, but he still left his signature. After a while, he walked out of the building and was sure that he would soon make a fortune with many important things ahead of him. He approached the man who sold newspapers and wanted to get the latest issue on finances. The man handed him a newspaper that immediately showed Fei Long's face. His company was actively developing in a short period of time and attracted a lot of investment. But he didn't want to leave his cultivation alone. It was already getting cold outside, so Zhu Lai decided to head back. Meanwhile, at the main office, the receptionist wished Mr. Liu a good morning. Liu Daxi was the chief investment officer for science and technology. He asked how Hu Shuo's information preparation was progressing and immediately asked to book a table at a restaurant for him, wanting to have lunch with Mr. Lin. The girl said that a young man was looking for him and he had important business. Liu Daxi immediately refused her offer, not even wanting to listen. He assumed that this was just another person who wanted to talk to him about their dreams. But he stopped abruptly and thought about it. He still gave him permission to let him in and then invited Xiao Hu to follow. Liu Daxi recalled that he was also young once. The girl accepted his order. After a while, Li Shulai appeared in the office. He didn't regret that he decided to look into this company. Shulai wanted to see which company would still win in this world. They started pouring green tea into his glass. The girl asked him to wait until Mr. Liu finished his business. He walked in with his phone in hand, talking about IT chain stores. Liu Daxi explained to the person on the phone that China's economy is growing thanks to the internet, and people's demand for products and services is also growing. But the man was busy, so he promised to invite him to dinner later, and immediately ended the call. At that moment, he glanced at the guest. At first glance, Shulai looked very determined. Liu Daxi suggested that he wanted to apply for a job and immediately refused. But Shulai resolutely stood up, explaining that this wasn't what he had come for. Liu Daxi wondered what he wanted then. Shulai knew that the chain of stores he wanted to develop was a failure, and this was due to the spread of an epidemic that would worsen the situation in a couple of years. And if so, then the plan to create a network will be destroyed. But this was not an accident. In his opinion, Liu Daxi wasn't as successful as Fei Long. After all, he remained arrogant while Yang relied on the opinions of others. Liu Daxi was already tensely waiting for a word from the unknown guy. But Shulai only wanted to play a little. He admitted that he had studied the situation in various domestic internet companies and made conclusions. Even now, he heard Liu Daxi mention an IT store chain, but advised him to give up development. Liu Daxi thought that this was his way of joining their group, not wanting to listen to his show-offs. But I wanted to hear his reason. Shulai said that in recent years, the country has been actively engaged in infrastructure construction, and land prices will grow rapidly. Because of this, it will be difficult for stores to make a profit due to rising costs. Therefore, it is better to develop online stores. Liu Daxi remained silent as he listened to his arguments. Li Shulai felt like he didn't believe it, but his performance was peerless. He quickly waved his words away. I thought his opinion was too shallow. He went to the window and looked out at the city. Liu Daxi explained that the cost of rent has increased, but the profits of the store's IP networks are enough to cover the costs. He reminded how popular their company is, for which queues are built. And I considered him not experienced enough in business, only working with papers. He explained how successful people achieve success by taking advantage of opportunities. Despite his advice in young age, he still appreciated his drive and perseverance. Li Shulai decided to give him the truth in practice. Since he already knew the truth, he began to give advice that electronica had its own logistics, and it could increase at any time, so you should be more careful. Liu Daxi laughed out loud at his words, comparing him to himself in his youth. After a moment, he changed his expression to a grim one, realizing that the guy in front of him could achieve a lot. Li Shulai decided to entrust everything to time. I handed him my card in case he wanted to contact him for help. Liu Daxi silently took the card from his hands. He looked at her with a disgusted sigh. He quickly threw the card down. The business card fell right into the trash can. After that, he just walked away from the trash can, and it only took a couple of seconds. How he'd come up to her again to get her business card. He couldn't understand why he couldn't stop thinking about that boy. It felt very strange. He put the card in the box, and he was going to make him the main witness when his IP address empire was completed. Li Shulai walked out of the building with a smile. He looked up at the bright sky, knowing that Lu Daxi wouldn't give up on his plan because of his words. But he was just going to wait for Lu Daxi to find it himself. They were both going to shame each other out of ignorance. Now it was Chandu's turn. He came back to the university, and I came to the men's dorm. He set down his suitcase. He was immediately greeted by a satisfied Zhang Ming who hugged him, not understanding where his friend had gone for the weekend. Zhulai started to push him away, explaining that he went to visit his parents. His eyes lit up, and he wished he would tell his parents about his cool friend, wanting to join his family. Zhulai rudely rejected his offer, joking that they were only looking for a sister, and Zhang Ming sat down on the step. He immediately began to pretend to be a girl, intending to become one if necessary. Zhulai sent it right away. He opened his suitcase to unpack. He's glad that he was able to leave Lu Daxi contacts. Now it's time to transfer the disk. He began to sort out his things. Part of the plan with Yanzhu was completed. He turned to Zhang Ming, remembering that he didn't go to see his family last weekend, wondering how he didn't miss them. Zhang Ming got angry, calling himself so independent that he didn't miss anyone. He was sure that everyone would ask him questions, but as long as he was around Zhulai, no one would bother him. And I started to worry that Zhulai might have met some bad guys there. But he slammed the suitcase shut, saying that everyone had left long ago. In any case, Zhang Ming promised to protect him if he got into trouble. Zhulai suddenly wondered if someone like Mr. Long was looking for him. Even if something important happens, they will definitely find him, and he will know about it. But after a while, an unknown man appeared, looking around strangely in the crowd. He noticed through Li Shulai's eyes, and it immediately dawned on him that the search had been successful. He quickly walked towards it. I grabbed his wrist. The unknown man pulled him by the arm, trying to lead him away. He took him to the park to show him something. At this moment, flames formed around him. Zhulai couldn't believe his eyes. The man abruptly activated his energy, but all that happened was the leaves falling right on his head. He was a little disappointed in himself, but I hoped I'd conveyed my thoughts to him. After a second, Zhulai noticed something in shock. Inside his body, a fire was formed that was created from energy. It turns out that a cultivator was standing in front of him. There are still many people who practice immortality in this world, but as long as he was weak, they didn't show it. They continued to stand on the path. Zhulai decided not to reveal that he was a novice cultivator after all. The man immediately felt a special energy from him, even though he had seen quite a few people in his life. He immediately began to imagine his granddaughter's relationship with Zhulai, which could make their family more majestic. Suddenly, Zhulai felt sick, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong. He decided to ask why the man was looking for him, but I doubted that it was worth talking to him. His uncle suddenly inquired about his relationship status, offering him his granddaughter. Zhulai immediately went into a terrible shock. This was his very first encounter with a cultivator, but he expected the latter to ask about things in the practice world and share experiences. Suddenly, he was afraid that the old man might go on blind dates. He immediately got out of it, pretending that he was already in a long-term relationship and was going to run to class. But his uncle grabbed him by the shoulder, and he started advertising to his granddaughter that she was kind and smart, so she also studied with him in the same group, so he decided to call her right away. Zhulai tried to refuse, but the chances were slim. The man had already made the call, holding him by the shoulder. He couldn't break free of his grip, and Zhulai stopped doubting his strength. The granddaughter on the other side of the phone did not expect a call from her grandfather, assuming that he already missed her. The man felt slightly uncomfortable, but Zhulai didn't see anything wrong with it. He swore to her that he thought of her every day and even came to visit her at the university. She had already gone out for a walk, and because of her grandfather, now she would have to go back. He said that he brought her a lot of delicious food and beautiful clothes, and this can be shared with friends. The call was dropped. Zhulai decided to leave so as not to interfere with their long-awaited meeting. He turned to leave. He hugged him, begging him to stay for at least 10 minutes. The man was sure that Zhulai was single and suggested that he first meet his granddaughter to make a decision. He was already furious, but he didn't have the chance to refuse. The man promised that his granddaughter is one of the best in the world, and he should like it. Zhulai replied to Borzo, admitting that because of his cultivation, he didn't have time for romance. They fought like yin and yang. The man immediately noticed in him not only potential, but also purposefulness. Zhulai had already begged the old man to let him go, but he clung to it like a tick, not wanting to lose it. Even so, he begged to treat the old man with compassion. And then he decided to use a forbidden move and fell to the ground, pretending to die. He began to scream, feigning terrible pain. Zhulai felt the absurdity of the situation. There was a clatter of heels beside them. He was clutching Zhulai's leg when his granddaughter called out to him. It was Xiao Ning, who was standing there in shock at the scene. He immediately shifted his stance to greet her. July couldn't believe that his granddaughter was Xiaoning. She couldn't understand what was going on there or why they were standing together. But she immediately started yelling at him, thinking it was all his fault. It was as if he was trying to get her through his relatives. Grandpa immediately pricked up his ears at her screams after hearing that Zulai also wanted to woo her. The man held out his hands for her to listen. But she didn't let him say a word and immediately informed him that Zulai was constantly pestering her, even though she had already explained to him that nothing could happen between them. But in her heart, she hoped that Zulai would become the old dog at her feet. Now he looked like he was manipulating her poor grandfather to get to her. Xiaoning was afraid that he would now take advantage of her family. She began to examine her grandfather to make sure he wasn't being bullied. Zulai was just asking her to stop talking to herself. Grandpa immediately shouted over her to explain the situation and why he was lying on the ground. But he was intrigued by his words that Zulai might have chased after his granddaughter one day. Xiaoning tried to protect her grandfather while he demanded an apology from her. Zulai didn't mind hearing her apologize. Her grandfather urged her on. Xiaoning couldn't believe that she needed to do this. She just grunted, not intending to. Grandpa raised his voice, intending to scold. But there were tears in her eyes right away, and she was disappointed that he had come to yell at her. She ran off into the distance, not wanting to talk to him anymore. Grandpa could only call after her. He sighed, no longer able to compete with her. But he immediately started trying to explain the whole situation to Zulai if there was a misunderstanding between them. Zulai only wanted to leave this place at last. The man had already realized that he had entered the path of cultivation, and he asked that he no longer hide his true identity in front of him. Zulai remained silent, but the man considered him a blank slate. He didn't care so much about matchmaking. He just wanted to make friends with him personally. He saw that his true identity was pure, his roots were clear, and his talents were special, which gave him a good opportunity to become a cultivator. Li Shulai now understood everything, and he needed to find a way to raise the cultivation rank. The old man praised him for not talking about cultivation too much, as it was good to be vigilant in their world. Otherwise, such words can get you killed. But the man couldn't be his mentor, because Zulai needed to come up with the answers on his own. He valued his character and looked at his progress, and was optimistic about his understanding of the situation. He only hoped that they would meet again soon, and when he got back on his feet, there was hope that the Zhang family wouldn't fall. Now his job was done. He informed Zulai that there would be a cultivator conference on the mountain this week, and to show his sincerity, he invited him. The old man confessed that the third realm was his limit, and he didn't have the strength to break through any further. But they have a sister who is considered one of the strongest in the world, and if he gets to her as an apprentice, he can achieve great success. Zulai was shocked to see a third realm master standing in front of him. The old man didn't seem very reliable, but at least now his motives were clear, and he was able to win her over. Moreover, he didn't like cultivating alone, so this was also a plus. He felt that the old man had a decent level and experience, but he was interested in information about his sister, who can help him. Then he decided not to deny him at least that much, and I promised to get in touch with him. The old man heaved a sigh of relief, but then he remembered that he still had to talk to the stubborn Xiaoning. It was Sunday, and Xiaoning was sad that her grandfather didn't understand how he had taken Zulai's bait. She highly doubted that he had any aptitude for cultivation. So I decided to check it out on my own. She even opened the taxi door for him, albeit with a forced grimace. The two of them got into the car, and they left quickly. Even in the car, he made some notes. On that day, her grandfather came to her, confessing that he just wanted to bring them together and suggested that they think about it because Zulai was a very good person. But she had a strong feeling that he had changed. In her eyes, he somehow became better, and she even looked at him. But at the same time, she shook her head, not understanding what was wrong with her. Not only has he become cuter, but Grandpa's also trying to force him on, and she can easily fall for the trap. Zulai wrote down the names on paper, waiting for an answer. He had given Lin Yan Hong the disc over a week ago, but there was still no response. Zulai began to worry that something had happened and the administration might not hand over the disc. It took him a long time to create the program, and Feilong reacted positively, immediately contacting him. But if he doesn't answer, then things will go badly. There was no way Zulai was willing to repeat his past life. He turned abruptly. Xiaoning was afraid that he had noticed her gaze. Li Shulai looked at her in disbelief because of her reaction. She kept peeking, noticing that he had a strange look in his eyes as well as some notes. Then she made up her mind and bit her lip. She remembered telling him to stop following her, and she screamed how much trouble he was causing her. She recalled how Zulai turned around and left. Now it occurred to her that maybe all this time she'd been making things up on her own and was just attached to him. The three of them were walking along a path in the forest, and they should be arriving soon. Li Shilai recalled that they were supposed to come to Qingyan. The old man explained that cultivators had their own lands, but ordinary people couldn't see them, and they had to pass through the barrier first. Li Shilai understood now. Suddenly, Xiaoning started to enter the multicolored portal. Li Shilai followed her with a surprised look on his face. A temple with heaven appeared in front of them. This place was guaranteed to be different from reality, because they literally walked in the sky. He was wondering if he would have his own lands in the future. At that moment, he noticed something. Xiaoning's chest was also lit up, but her energy was greatly weakened. He kept looking at it, wondering if it could be restored. Xiaoning blushed all over and was confused as to where he was looking. She screamed in anger, and a whirlwind swirled around her. Li Shilai was startled by this. He hadn't expected her to be so capable, but her energy was still weak. Xiaoning pointed at him and blushed at his words, but Li Shilai was speaking out of pure interest, and he wanted to move her thoughts to thinking about how to contribute to the development of the state. Xiaoning shouted at him, not understanding why she would do this, and she ordered me to stop looking at it because it is weak and will not be suitable for cultivation. The grandfather watched this and began to worry that his granddaughter might be left alone forever. Li Shilai still didn't understand the reason for her weak energy. He assumed that he just didn't see the reason because of his cultivation level. Xiaoning hoped so too. But even with their complicated personalities, Grandpa believed they would make a good family. When they came to the temple, there was a crowd of people. They all looked unconventional, and they were also cultivators. Julai hadn't expected this at all, and he wondered if similar events were being held in other cities. The place was both ordinary and unusual, and there was even a man in a postman's uniform standing in front of it. He was glad that his novel was finally becoming a reality. This man abruptly flew in the direction of the temple. Julai didn't expect that he would ever see this place again. He was interested in how fast he delivered letters and how much he earned. Grandpa informed them that they needed to visit their sister and suggested that they take a walk. They stomped along the path, and we found ourselves in a gorgeous courtyard with its own swimming pool. They went to her sister's room, and the old man informed her that Xiaoning had brought a boy. The girl immediately blushed and ordered not to speak like that. Li Shilai knew that the old man didn't understand at all. He expected what would happen next, thinking that cultivators must have some special skills that ordinary people couldn't see and had to hide it. Xiaoning looked at his reaction, but it seemed that he didn't mind his grandfather's words. Li Shilai looked at her out of the corner of his eye, not understanding why Xiaoning hadn't told him about this before. He smiled, feeling a certain freshness in the place. A blue portal suddenly appeared in front of them. Lin Shuhui, who was the head of Qingyun, emerged from it. Grandpa greeted his sister, but Xiaoning greeted her grandmother. Li Shilai was shocked that his sister was Xiaoning's grandmother, even though she looked young. Shuhui didn't expect anything more from them than a greeting without politeness. Grandpa blushed, blooming at her words. She patted his head and noticed that he was starting to look younger, which meant that his cultivation was progressing well. He believed that it was all thanks to her. Li Shilai listened to their cute dialogues with huge eyes. I decided to calm down. He had read in online articles that the higher a cultivator's cultivation level, the younger they would become, and this gave the answer. My sister asked me to talk about any difficulties that might arise. The old man hugged her and agreed with everything she said. Shulai could feel how righteous and kind she was, even from her appearance, but everything felt very strange. She clarified whether he was really Xiaoning's target and felt how pure his true self was. Xiaoning immediately explained that this was her grandfather's fantasy, and they were just classmates. She looked down at them, blaming them for bringing the wrong Xiaoning guy. Grandpa immediately made up his mind that he saw Shulai as a good and talented guy, wanting to make him his disciple. Her sister rubbed her lips, peering at him. Li Shilai looked brilliant and statuesque. Then she suggested that you first get acquainted with everything. Grandpa abruptly put a hand on his shoulder, but I immediately congratulated him on something. Li Shilai looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding why he was being congratulated. He explained that his sister would immediately refuse to do this if she was dissatisfied, so everything is in order. My grandfather grinned, assuming that some kind of test was waiting for him soon, so he wished him luck. They arrived at the banquet and everyone started chatting and eating. At this moment, the sound of high heels could be heard in the hall. Everyone immediately lowered their heads to greet their sister. On the other hand, everyone also fell silent and politely closed their eyes. She allowed everyone to sit down, and she announced that in a year's time, everyone should advance in their cultivation and their energy should be purified. Everyone had to refrain from being arrogant and work hard to make progress. Li Shilai didn't know if the general change in energy was due to his rebirth, but he put it down to mere coincidence. Sis announced that, as always, they would hold a small event, and whoever won first place would receive a generous reward in the form of new weapons. Last year, the winner received a flying magic weapon, and you can use it to travel thousands of miles a day. Everyone was shouting, wondering how much they would spend on them this year. The man was confident that his family would win, and the other was sure of the opposite. My grandfather grinned. He solemnly introduced his new student to them. Everyone thought that he must be a genius if the master chose him, especially since he was full of energy. Li Shulai clenched his teeth in embarrassment and anger. He tugged at his grandfather's t-shirt, and he reminded me that he is an ordinary beginner who has not even managed to learn one technique yet. The old man supported him, explaining that the event was only for entertainment, but he knew that his sister had prepared her own event for Zulai. Li Shulai trusted him blindly, even though he didn't want to be a part of it. Xiaoning immediately heard their conversation, and she was angry that Zulai was already calling his grandfather uncle. The old man promised that Li Shulai would figure it out for himself soon. They went outside and walked around the temple. At one point, they went upstairs and Zulai noticed something. He was completely shocked. There were people flying swords in front of him, and he couldn't believe that cultivators were capable of such a thing. The guys were fighting against an unknown creature. Dragons were coming out of their hands. Li Shulai stood still and couldn't believe what he saw when it was all just his imagination. And in front of them were guys who were just peacefully preparing food. First, they cultivated hard, and then they cooked. Zulai looked around and realized that no one was reacting as strangely as him. Xiaoning was beginning to worry that he was disappointed in what he saw. She explained that the path to cultivation is long and boring, and it is impossible to get together every time to exchange calligraphy classics. Her grandmother believed that you should combine work and leisure, so once a year she holds an event to relax and exchange impressions and experiences along the way. My sister's hobby was just delicious food, and if you satisfy her, you're a winner. Yishoning had already advised me to figure out what to cook. She thought it was too hot for a good appetite, so it was better to prepare some snacks. She began to list the various appetizers that sounded delicious. Xiaoning only hoped that he took her hint. She revealed that her grandmother is originally from Sichuan, so she might miss the taste from her hometown. Li Shulai noticed how worried she was about him and found it cute. He understood what she was saying. In his previous life, he was an ace at cooking because his girlfriend constantly asked him to cook different dishes and manipulated him. She liked to eat delicious food, so he had no choice. Zulai knew how to cook any cuisine, and it wasn't a problem. He even knew how to cook French and Italian dishes, but the desire to cook for that girl was gone, and he didn't expect that such a useless skill would remain in his next life. He stood in front of his desk thinking. My sister immediately noticed that he was taking part, and I was happy with it. He stood in front of the board doing nothing. The old man didn't understand what the kid was doing, hoping he could cook, and I began to worry that he shouldn't have praised it. My sister didn't see the point in rushing either. He had a lot of energy at a young age, so she was sure he wouldn't make a mistake. But cooking in a hurry was also a bad decision. Zulai began to wonder what would be better since there were so many dishes. Then he decided to pick up the frying pan and cook all at once, pouring oil into the pan. An event was held near the temple. Everyone looked at him in disbelief, not understanding what he was cooking. Zulai had already finished everything and was serving the last dish. The huge round table was filled with many different dishes, causing everyone to be shocked. Everyone started judging it, thinking that taste is more important than quantity. The guys started to humiliate him, suggesting that he wasn't good at cultivation. An unknown man who Zulai wasn't previously familiar with appeared. He too was sure that this act would only disgust the chief. Zulai wasn't interested in their opinions, and he wasn't afraid of her rejection. Everyone kept talking about him, waiting for the head to kick him out. Li Shulai stood next to them and suffered from the noisy shouts as the chief silently watched. The old man was standing next to her and gave her a sidelong glance. Even so, he could see that she was just trying to hide her emotions. After all, she was tapping her finger on the chair. But he was glad that his sister was so keen and how well he knew her. He cleared his throat. And drawing Shulai's attention, he showed a good sign. He smiled at him as if nothing was happening. The old man was glad that he was staying calm, intending to continue helping him. Later, the tasting started, and the maids started to pick up a little bit. They picked up various dishes with chopsticks and put them on their plates. Then they carried them directly into the hands of the jury. They began to taste slowly, and the guys shouted with happiness because they had never tasted such delicious dishes. Zulai made sure that the food was to their liking, but it remained to wait for the head's response. She walked slowly over to his large desk, and the girls presented them with fish soup. She started to taste the first soup, and it tasted better than she expected. Then she started eating the fifth dish, red pepper fish heads. And this dish was definitely to her taste from the look on her face. Li Shulai was glad that her reaction was positive. The 10th course was Ma Oksewan. The other participants couldn't believe that he knew so many recipes. She started to try the 12th course, which had spicy soy curd. My sister was very surprised that he had prepared her favorite dish. I took the first bite. She went into a terrible shock when the taste reached her mouth. This taste was the one she missed, and she wanted to eat 10 servings of it. Her face radiated pleasure as she blushed. And at the moment, she wondered what he added to these dishes. Li Shulai answered honestly that they were prepared with sincerity. In his memories, there were times when a girl asked him to cook 10 meals a day, and he stupidly agreed. People were sure that he would be disqualified. They weren't even going to try it again. But his sister confidently ordered him to hand him a magic weapon and a book. Everyone around her was shocked because she hadn't even tasted their food yet. A cook appeared with them, who decided to enlighten them. He had been studying nutrition for about 60 years. And even though Zulai's cultivation was weak, he was quite good at cooking. Even if it was difficult, he did it quickly and efficiently. While the others prepared one dish, he managed to prepare the 10th. And the old man abruptly fell to his knees, begging to be accepted as a disciple. Li Shulai stared at him in silence, his mouth hanging open. It was already evening. People were leaving the temple in frustration. Meanwhile, Zulai was staying at his sister's house. He professionally fried meat and vegetables on a quick fire. My sister stood by and watched. She stated that Zulai would become her disciple starting tomorrow. Li Shulai didn't expect this at all because he thought that it was done through some kind of ceremony. His sister did not understand his reaction to her words, knowing that he was embarrassed by such a quick acceptance as a disciple. Zulai scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. My sister reminded me that it was the 21st century. They all sat down to dinner, advising him to cultivate on his own after returning. And if something is not clear, then you can ask Chao Yang. She said that every week you will need to come to Qingyun to rest and get training. And at that moment, she turned to Xiaoning. My grandmother asked me to be by Shulai's side to solve her cultivation problem. Xiaoning happily agreed to her request. Finally, they went home. Li Shulai and Xiaoning were walking along the path. She whirled around, aware that he was staring at her all the way. Li Shulai was shocked, as if she had eyes in the back of her head. But he didn't have any of that and just got lost in thought. I decided to be more patient from now on. He went ahead, not going to waste any time or gifts. Xiaoning was confused that her grandfather had become his teacher. She screamed sharply, assuming he was just using her. The school day has arrived. Professor Guo praised Zulai for a good thesis, where both the structure, evaluation, and analysis were excellent. He could confidently say that he was proud of him. Li Shulai started to laugh out of happiness and from so much praise. But he offered to discuss some problematic areas. He explained that a dissertation can further strengthen the interpretation and elaboration of concepts. And he began to show by example when a girl came into the office. She asked Professor Guo to come to the office for academic affairs. Therefore, he suggested postponing their discussion until tomorrow. She started to lead Professor Guo into the study, and Li Shulai knew this moment. Shueli was waiting for them in the hallway. Professor Guo just passed by. But Shueli knew that she would take revenge on the old man by going to deal with him. There were footsteps behind her. She whirled around and saw Li Shulai standing behind her. But it was even to her advantage that he would see his favorite professor sink to the bottom. Later, he returned to the dorm. I couldn't stop clicking with my ballpoint pen. Zhang Ming immediately noticed that Li Shulai was nervous, but he couldn't understand why, since the diploma had already been checked. Zulai admitted that he wasn't thinking about that. He hit him on the head, reminding him that he also needed to finish his degree. But Zhang Ming was already in utter despair. So I crawled back on the bed, preferring to rest. Li Shulai understood that the professor would still be punished, but before that, he needed to implement the plan. He slammed his pen down on the table, intending to show everyone the evidence that he had been collecting all along. In the evening, they arrived at the office, and the academic affairs representative was sitting in front of the professor. He sat there rather tensely, not understanding what was waiting for him. Next to the representative sat a sad Shueli. The representative approached the professor, and according to information from Shueli, he used his authority to start a relationship with her. The professor slammed his hand down hard on the table. He immediately began to deny her words, assuring her of his innocence. The professor had been working at the university for several years, and everyone knew very well about his character and morals. Jolie squeezed out her tears, pretending that he was manipulating her with a diploma. Professor Guo recalled that her thesis was originally full of mistakes, especially since it wasn't even written by her. She broke down in tears, claiming that he had taken advantage of an innocent girl to satisfy his needs. Julie collapsed on the table and began to sob as she was comforted. The representative felt uncomfortable in such an atmosphere. The girl saw the truth in her words. After all, Jolie was a person with great capabilities, good looks, and there was no point in her wasting her innocence to desecrate the professor's name. Professor Guo was telling her to shut up since she could only lie. Jolie continued to cry and was terrified that he was also asking for proof of his crime. The professor stood his ground and did not want to be defamed. Jolie continued her game, pretending that she didn't have such influence, and she always considered the professor to be honest. He was trying to stop her delirium, and there was no way he would have done that with a family and children. Julie began her story of how he brought her to the study and locked the door. She was choking on her tears, trying to make everyone believe her words without proof. The girl stopped her speech. Julie wiped away her tears, calling him a real beast, and heard that Professor Guo had the lowest chance of being released. The girl hugged her, considering her a victim, promising that the organization would deal with everything. They advised the professor to stop teaching until the case was completed. Professor Guo stood up, not knowing what to do. Julie smiled briefly from under her tears, tasting the taste of successful revenge. Zhang Ming was secretly observing this. He realized that Julie had made a scene again. Zhang Ming immediately ran to the dorm. He quickly opened the door. He ran into the room, urgently informing Zulai about Julie's slander to help Professor Guo. Li Shilai promised that everything would be ready by nightfall. It was already 12 o'clock in the morning. Zhang Ming and Zulai, dressed like robbers in all black, they started putting up pictures of Zulai with a man on the streets. At this rate, they put up the entire street in these photos. And then the next day, people started noticing these photos. Everyone immediately recognized Zulai from the pictures with the men and found out about her true identity. At this time, she only quietly woke up and sat on the bed. When she opened her eyes, she looked around. Her dorm mates were looking at her with strange expressions. Julie couldn't understand what exactly was going on. A friend admitted that someone put up her photos. She shoved her feet into her slippers, not knowing what she was talking about. The girl already had one of the photos in her hand, and she immediately showed it to Julie, which was a picture of her kissing a guy. Her eyes widened in confusion as this happened. Julie abruptly snatched the photo out of her hands. She clutched the photo in her hands with hatred, already intending to take revenge on the culprit. Her teeth clenched in fury. She was going to deal with everyone. She tore the picture in half. The veins were popping out of her face, and she was blushing with hatred for whoever had done this. There were still some embarrassing photos of her on the board. She started ripping them out. Everyone was judging her when she was shaking with anger. The girls around her began to wonder where she got so much money from. She turned on them with wild eyes, telling them to whisper even louder. But they didn't care about her threats because they were no longer in her power. She'd heard all the denunciations from the county, and the rumors were spreading at the speed of light. Li Shilai watched from the sidelines, but she herself was not empathetic to others. This will be the first step towards destroying her image, and it's time to go straight to the second one. He arrived at the coffee shop. Young Fei Long praised his brilliant plan with admiration, wanting to make it a reality faster. He had read about his technology, which would help Fei Long identify its weaknesses. Li Shilai just hoped that he would be satisfied. But Fei Long had expected Zulai to join his company and was upset. Li Shilai admitted that his previous plan was just a sketch, and today's plan already concerns trade. Fei Long sensed that Zulai had not been idle all this time, and something would happen soon. Li Shilai openly asked for help in acquiring the Zhangquang company. Fei Long didn't understand at first. He started talking about his esteemed Professor Guo, and after a while he explained the whole situation, wanting to help him get rid of this terrible brand and show everyone Xueli's arrogance. Fei Long loudly stood up from his chair, slamming his hands on the table. He realized that there was an incredible nobility hidden in Xulai. He started to leave, intending to deal with Xueli and her patrons. He drove back to the men's dorm. Zhang Ming walked into the room. Li Shilai asked what was wrong with him. This was his first step, and he needed to get rid of Zhui Li as soon as possible. He clarified Professor Guo's status, that he was still suspended. Zhang Ming explained that he couldn't get away with it, and only hoped that nothing would happen to the professor. Li Shilai was immediately going to leave for a while. Professor Guo was standing in the park, looking at the river in a gazebo. At that moment, he was called out from behind. Zulai promised him that the truth would come out very soon. Professor Guo began to worry that it would be too much for him to fight with such powerful people. The problem wasn't the professor, but the people who weren't even looking at him anymore. He was talking to one person, but he didn't have time to talk at all. He slammed the door in the professor's face. Another said that there was no chance because the deputy director was involved in the case. After Julie and her father found out about the situation, they were angry and would go all the way, so it was unlikely that the university would go against them. But the Nong family considered it a small matter, and the only solution was to voluntarily admit and dismiss. Otherwise, her family would ruin the professor's reputation, and he would no longer be able to find a job. In life, you have to pay for everything, and the man hinted that there are still many places that need teachers. Professor Guo pressed his lips together because of nerves and powerlessness. He couldn't believe that a female student would adopt such methods, and there was nothing else he could do. Li Shilai reported that Xueli was using the money, and they would take even more money to transfer her. Professor Guo couldn't even expect him to believe in him, but he didn't understand where they would get that kind of money from. And I was hoping that there was still a judge who would help me put everything in its place. He now concluded that Sulai had nothing else to teach. But he asked me to remember that he has outstanding abilities, and you should be wary of people so as not to get into trouble. Li Shulai reminded him of his own words that one should not give up in the face of difficulties. And he promised that revenge would definitely come. He knew that no one should escape justice, and he begged the professor not to commit suicide. The professor found this strange, but he agreed. The professor agreed to wait for revenge. Later, in the corridor of the first academic building, Li Shulai walked into the classroom where Jueli was sitting. He approached her, ordering her to withdraw her complaint. Jueli jumped up from her chair in shock. She didn't understand how he could say such a thing, and reminded him what had happened to Professor Guo and how she could destroy him. Li Shulai stated about the last opportunity to do so. Jueli was furious at his words, thinking that he was incapable of anything. She reminded that Sulai was the bottom of their society, and he couldn't help his beloved teacher. And she continued to humiliate him by calling him her footstool. This was a personal tip for Sulai, so that he wouldn't try to frame her. Li Shulai wasn't afraid of her threats as he announced the start of the countdown. Jueli didn't understand his words at all. In the evening, at the Gueli family's estate, she started to take off her heels and giggle. She was in a great mood and hummed a tune all day. She put her shoes on the shelf and announced her return to her father. But at that moment, rapid footsteps were heard. My father happily informed me that they would soon become even more famous, because the Feilong company itself wanted to cooperate with them, and he would very soon go to the bank for a business development loan. He had no doubt that she knew about this company, which had received several million investments and was now ranked first in the industry, and Head Yang himself had sent him an invitation. Shirley thought that the company was much richer than them. She recalled Zulai's words with a sneer, realizing that she would now become twice as powerful. My father was smiling brighter than the sun, waiting for their family's assets to increase by a few more zeros. He promised to introduce her to the circle of great ladies so that she would enjoy fine cuisine. Jueli promised her father to work hard in the future. He also supported her in return. The next day, they were sitting in the classroom for self-study, and Jueli waved a piece of paper. She threw it in Zulai's direction. Unexpectedly for her, he turned and caught the paper in the air. The paper flew back at her. It went straight into her mouth. She jumped in anger, but Zulai abruptly started counting down to 3. Jueli stood in disbelief as the countdown came to an end. And then he reached the number 1. The audience received a call on her phone where her father shouted into the phone that they were bankrupt, and he asked her not to come home and leave until she could understand anything. Li Shulai was glad that it was just in time. Jueli approached him with a trembling voice, not understanding what he had done. Jueli didn't see any other logical solution against the great and powerful Zhang family. She got another call on her phone. When she picked up the phone, a barrage of insults rained down on her to get her money back. Jueli was already desperate, and she dropped the call. But there were endless calls coming in. She dropped her phone on the ground and screamed. Jueli herself fell to the floor, hoping that it was just a dream. Zulai handed her the phone, reminding her that money was the most unreliable thing, but only they can save her. He suggested that she think about it carefully. Night fell. Jueli was sneaking towards the mansion when the crowd of people finally dispersed, but they had sprayed everything with paint, so it would be difficult to enter. She walked shakily through the grounds, hoping that all the vandals were gone. But when she got home, it was all smashed up and painted too. She abruptly remembered that she had jewelry and started to worry. So I quickly ran towards my room. Trembling hands gently opened the door, but all her lockers were empty. Like the other nightstands, they were just as empty. Welly collapsed on the floor, full of despair. Li Shulai knew that there were many such people in this world, that they only show off their money. But every rich man has his own rich man, who will be much more influential. Li Shulai was standing over her, and only he could save her. Jueli didn't understand how this happened. After all, her family only invested in the Feilong company. She sat on the couch and sighed, looking at her phone. Jueli had no idea where her parents were or what condition they were in, so she tried to call them. There were tears in her eyes, and she was worried about her parents. She already had a picture in her head of how the collectors dealt with them through torture. She began to think too much, and she didn't even have enough money for the rest of her life. At this moment, there were loud knocks on the door. Jueli screamed in fear. The man was kicking at her door. The door was held up by snot, so he didn't even have to strain. His friend saw Shueli enter the building, but she didn't come out again. The third man thought that she must have money. Shueli was hysterical, not knowing what to do in this situation. The door was still being kicked. She started shouting that she didn't have any money, but her parents did. They went into the room and grabbed her by the neck, intending to charge her father's debt. She was roughly thrown onto the mattress. One of the men ordered her to be held. Zheli screamed and begged to be released. The man began to act thoughtlessly and admire her, and intending to use it. Zheli was crying harder, assuring her that she definitely didn't have any money. But at that moment, the bandit found her wallet. He grinned, knowing that she was lying to him. Zheli begged for her last bit of money, but she was immediately slapped in the face. There were only a few hundred left in the wallet, but the men offered to repay the debt not with money. They appreciated her beauty. "That's why we preferred it," she screamed, refusing to do so. The man now understood why the professor was harassing her and offered to simply give himself up of his own free will. There was no way Yuli was willing to agree to such a thing. But the gunman recalled photos of her with various men, doubting that she was so innocent. Zheli begged them, promising that she would find her parents and pay back the debt, and they would definitely be ready to stand up for their own daughter. The man decided to kill her because her parents have long run away and no one will help her. He squeezed her hands. Zheli started to remember how well she had spent her day yesterday, but now she was in hell. The men were going to have a good time playing with her, but at that moment, he was grabbed by the shoulder. The man stopped him from moving his hands. Zheli felt a drop of hope that she would be saved after all. The bandit ordered them to leave to inform Mr. Lee about a new valuable product. Her eyes are filled with emptiness as she realizes where she is. Zheli kept begging to be released, and she swore she didn't have any money. But the men didn't care when they pulled her by the hair. They slapped her in the face for shouting loudly, promising to kill her if she made a sound. The guys started laughing at her when she was afraid to speak. They led her to their car, telling her not to cause trouble and telling her not to fight back. At this moment, a lighter was lit in the forest. In front of her was Li Shulai in the bushes. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw him. The image of him saying that only he could be her savior flashed through her mind. She started screaming, begging to be saved. After shouting, she abruptly broke out of the bandit's hands, tearing off her hair, and rushed in his direction. But they caught her again, and she kept begging him. The same phrase kept running through her mind, and she hoped that he would save her. She knelt down, begging to be saved, knowing that she would soon be sold. Li Shulai saw her sincere desire for salvation and agreed to help. But first, he asked me to confess to my actions against Professor Guo. I turned on the tape recorder so she could tell me everything. She began to say that the professor did not give admission to her diploma. Li Shulai tried to get the right words out, saying that she was just slandering him while she calmly handed in her diploma. Zheli swore that she didn't want to do anything wrong and begged to be saved. He asked one last question, asking if the professor had ever done anything illegal on her. The man reached out to her, knowing that the guy wanted to save her. Zheli immediately denied that the professor did anything to her against her will. Back then, Li Shulai deduced that Professor Guo wasn't lying in his words. The bandits ordered him not to interfere with their work. They reached out to her again, and Zheli could only hope for help from Zhulai. She claimed that Professor Guo didn't deserve this and that she had just lured him into her trap. Li Shulai was demanding that she admit her mistake. Zheli now realized that she deserved all of this, but she still begged me to help her, to let her go. She promised that she would help clean up Professor Guo's reputation and was willing to listen to Shulai's instructions. Li Shulai paused the recording on the dictaphone, finishing the interrogation. But he immediately apologized to her because the bandits were not as kind as he was, and it is worth paying back debts, so I gave the order to continue. She screamed in anger, knowing that he had just tricked her. The bandits laughed at her stupidity, realizing that it was a naive decision to trust him, and he was praised for such steadfastness. Li Shulai had nothing to do with them. He only wanted to clear the professor's honor. So he reminded her of what he'd said, that there was always someone richer than you. Zheli stared after him with a tear-stained face, knowing that it was all over. The bandits were laughing behind her back, intending to sell her off with gusto. She started insulting him afterward, reminding him that if her parents were here, he wouldn't say a word. Zheli began to blame herself for believing his lies like a fool. They picked her up abruptly, preparing to take her away at last. He slapped her sharply, telling her to come with him. Zheli couldn't stop crying anymore, but she didn't scream either. She only complained about Li Shulai as she left, intending to take revenge on him. Shulai stopped abruptly. He knew very well that people didn't change, and if she had been more modest, he would have been willing to help her. But she hadn't been able to pass the final test. Zheli had completely lost her trust in him and was unwilling to believe his words. The man ordered to release the girl, anticipating the show. They put Zheli back on the ground. The bandit reminded her that they had a lot of money, so she should be gentle, and then they might take pity on her. Li Shulai asked how much money her family owed, and it turned out to be exactly 1 million. He immediately handed them a check to pay off the debt. There was a sum of 20 million written on it, Causing Julie to be shocked, she ran to him to snatch the check out of his hands for her own good. But Li Shulai pulled the paper back in front of her, which caused her to fall to the ground. July said that he had brought his savings books to help her family with their debts and had no doubt that she would not miss the opportunity to use it. Now nothing will help her. He decided to admit that the Feilong company had only offered to cooperate with her family because of his request. She sat on the ground in shock, not believing his words. Li Shulai reminded her that a missed chance was scarier than hell itself. He explained that it was all her fault. July turned to the bandits, saying that he had nothing to do with her affairs, so he gave them the right to do whatever they wanted with her. She was thrown to the ground as she begged him to help her, but he silently walked away. The next day, a recording from a dictaphone was played on the territory of the university, where Julie confessed to her deception. Everyone started to recognize Julie's voice, but they didn't understand who was asking her questions. It was now clear to everyone that Professor Guo wasn't guilty and had been suspended for nothing. Everyone hoped that the professor would still be able to return to work. The head was informed that Zhang Shelley's family was rumored to have gone bankrupt, and it was clear to everyone that Professor Guo was clean. The head was sure that no one would take Julie's side now, and Professor Guo could be returned to teaching. He ordered that such mistakes should not be allowed again, otherwise it could ruin the entire system. The head of state demanded to prevent such spread of injustice in the future. Everyone was sure that Julie had already paid the price for what she said, since she didn't show up again. According to rumors, she dropped out of school due to the bankruptcy of the family. Someone even saw her in a nightclub, but she looked different and denied her identity. But everyone considered it a fair punishment. Li Shulai pulled Zhang Ming by the scruff of the neck to stop him from eavesdropping on conversations. Zhang Ming wondered who had done such a good deed, but Li Shulai didn't hide the fact that it was his doing. Of course, he didn't believe it, but Zhang Ming knew that Li Shulai didn't have that kind of money. But he promised that he would help a friend in a difficult situation. Li Shulai was disappointed that his friend didn't believe him. Zhang Ming didn't understand what had happened to him, but he abruptly took his friend by the scruff of the neck to prove it. He knew that he had helped Professor Guo, and it wouldn't happen again. They came to the dining room. Zhang Ming wondered if he should buy Shulai something, but he decided to eat soup instead. At that moment, he noticed Xiaoning standing there. She walked up to him and immediately realized that the recording was made by his hands. Zhulai didn't answer as he continued to chew on his lunch. She took his silence as a sign of agreement. Xiaoning wasn't so stupid that she couldn't make out his voice after processing it. Back then, he didn't understand why she was asking the obvious question. Xiaoning sat down, starting to ask about everything related to Shili, not understanding the motive, but not judging him for what had happened. Zhulai gave out that it was just taken away by creditors, and he was not involved in this. He noticed that apart from Xiaoning, no one paid any attention to his voice. Only she understood Zhueli's situation, and this was a true sense of justice. She screamed, reminding him of the consequences with Zhueli. But no one knew what would happen to her next, and July saw no point in saving people who were born bad. Professor Guo was never guilty, and if he didn't help, no one would know the outcome. He already had a picture in his mind from his previous life of Professor Guo jumping off the roof, so he just wanted to help him, while the others didn't do anything. Zhoning aggressively stood up from the table. She started to leave, but was met by Zhang Ming. But she ignored him as she passed, and he didn't understand why. Zhang Ming handed him a cup of coffee, and Zhulai explained her behavior by saying that Xiaoning had a heightened sense of justice. He didn't expect his friend to thank him for the coffee, but Zhulai started making fun of him. Later, he met up with Professor Guo, and he truly appreciated Zhulai's words back then, because he didn't know where to go, even had thoughts of dying. Li Shulai knew exactly what he was thinking, but the professor was glad that Li Shulai was there for him and became his ray of light on a dark day. He was glad that there was still a place for justice in the world, and Zhulai did things without expecting anything in return. Then the professor inadvertently remembered the diploma that needed to be reviewed, causing Zhulai to sigh. Some time passed. Kexin, who had been working hard on writing the piece for months, appeared in the aisle, and the publishing house sent her several copies, one of which she would like to give to Shulai as the main fan. Li Shulai felt very honored by such a gift, asking her to sign it right away so that he could show off when she became a star. He wasn't even that happy when Yang Filong offered to cooperate. Li Shulai promised that he would read everything, but Kexin looked rather thoughtful. He thought she had something else to say. Kexin pretended that nothing had happened, but he asked her to tell him so that he could help. She said that her mother and brother were visiting her next week, but she didn't understand why. If they were so judgmental of life in a provincial city, and because of their busy schedule, they wanted to throw the responsibility for her brother onto her. Li Shulai realized that the situation was starting to escalate. She felt that she was becoming more popular, and her brother saw the amount of money asking if she was the same Liao Kexin, but she didn't want to deny it. just to prove to them what she was capable of. But her parents decided that since she was earning money on her own, she had to complete her education and send them money. Her mother called her, telling her to write her manuscripts from home, reminding her that her brother was in high school and should not be abandoned at such a time. Kexin told her that she had tried too hard to get into school to give up, but her mother didn't care. Li Shulai asked her personal opinion, and she couldn't drop out of school. I didn't want to sacrifice my future for my brother. July advised her to continue to stand her ground, because that way they wouldn't be able to do anything. She can become financially independent and get out of her parents' control. Kexin wasn't going to drop out of school or writing, but then her parents would definitely reject her. Li Shulai had convinced her that family ties sometimes only got in the way, and she knew what to do. He suggested that she wait for her parents to arrive first and then think about it. Xiaoning watched them from the side in silence. She noticed that Zulai had already dated a certain girl several times and was worried that he might like her. But the thought made her laugh. She called out sharply to the entire courtyard. Xiaoning wondered if this could be the task that his grandfather had given him. Kexin noticed that a classmate was looking for him and decided to say goodbye right away. She noticed that Zulai immediately stopped laughing when he saw her, not understanding the reason. Xiaoning was angry that he was still looking at her back even when she left, and she said that his grandfather invited him to practice. They went back to Jingyan. Their car was flying at high speed on the highway. They sat awkwardly in the back seat in silence. Xiaoning herself was shocked by her thoughts, but the question still came out along with a slight blush. She was very curious about what kind of relationship he had with that girl. Li Shilai didn't answer and just laughed at her. The car window opened abruptly. Xiaoning didn't understand what was going on when he started to approach her. She crouched in a corner, not understanding what he was doing. Shulai was grinning slyly, deceiving her. But Xiaoning was actually worried that he might be mad at her because of her words. Li Shulai guessed that she might be interested in him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be interested in these questions. Xiaoning yelled sharply, denying everything. But she noticed that he didn't deny what she'd said about the girl. Li Shulai honestly admitted that he liked her before, but Xiaoning didn't like the past tense. But right now, he didn't feel anything for her. Abruptly, he twisted his fingers into a tight knot, and they got into a fight. He won it and brought Xiaoning to tears by reminding her that he was now her grandmother's disciple, and if she started calling him Uncle Mentor, there would be no romance between them. Now it hit her that he didn't like her anymore. She couldn't believe it. Her eyes filled with disappointment. Her face darkened and she turned away, and Li Shulai noticed her abrupt silence. She was upset and asked him why he didn't like her anymore. I assumed that this particular girl could replace her and concluded that she and Kexin were dating. Zulai immediately explained that Kexin wasn't his girlfriend, but a spiritual teacher, which was admirable. Li Shulai knew that he wasn't worthy of her. Xiaoning knew very well that Zulai wasn't like the others, but he didn't want to listen to it any further. He had liked Xiaoning for dozens of years, and before rebirth, he had been in love with her, running after her like a dog. But now his life was completely devoid of feelings and romance, just business. She remembered him telling her to think about more serious things, and they weren't just excuses. Xiaoning didn't hope to reach him anymore, feeling the terrible distance between them where he was no longer out of reach. They returned to the temple and found their sister. The boys looked at her. Grandma was sitting in the lotus position, noticing them immediately. They stood. Grandma's eyes snapped open, but her pupils abruptly widened as a bright fire appeared in them. She asked him what he'd been doing all week. Li Shulai pondered her question as he recalled. According to his memories, he broke Xueli and restored Professor Guo's reputation. I went to the supermarket and trained with my grandfathers, and then participated in a cultural festival. But he said that he did almost nothing, only helped one dear person and trained every day. Because of Xueli, he didn't have time for business at all. My grandmother sensed a very strange cultivation and asked me to follow her. But she watched as Li Shulai silently left with his grandmother. Xiaoning sighed, tired of her own thoughts, hoping that she didn't like Shulai. Li Shulai and his grandmother entered the building, where there was a hot sauna inside. It looked pretty good. Suddenly, his grandmother told him to get ready and change his clothes. He was immediately shocked, not understanding what she was saying, and he immediately withdrew, explaining that he did not have time for this and had his own principles. But his sister interrupted his monologue, raising her voice and repeating the order, because she just wanted to submerge him in the water. Her cheeks were still flushed, even though she thought he was just a doofus. Li Shulai, he felt a little strange when he undressed in front of a person he had seen twice, and he was afraid that the clan's specialty was far from gathering energy. His grandmother grabbed him sharply by the collar. She took it like a toy. She brought him down hard with one hand. All his clothes came off abruptly, and he immediately fell into the pool after her toss. Li Shulai started to boil in the strange green water, and only bubbles came out of it. He shouted sharply to complain about such treatment. There was a bright green color reflected in his eyes. His body began to be imbued with spiritual energy, and his level gradually increased, and his body became light, as if every channel was relaxing. Li Shulai asked what was in the composition of this water. The grandmother said that it was a restorative pool, offering to rinse off, but she couldn't speak abruptly, blushing. Her eyes took in his athletic body. She decided to continue drinking her tea, thinking about clearing her thoughts. His mentor ordered him to bathe. Li Shulai couldn't understand what was wrong with her. He stared at her back in disbelief. Her sister's face was blushing, but she didn't understand why she had such a strange feeling for her disciple. She clutched the bowl in her hands, feeling that it was all because of Li Shulai. But I immediately started to deny these thoughts, but my heart still beat faster. She didn't understand why he looked so familiar when they were seeing each other for the second time. The sister assumed that it was Zulai, so she was going to investigate his body. Li Shulai looked at her confusion from the back, not understanding what was happening to her. But he decided that such people always have problems with their heads and did not pay attention. He closed his eyes and continued to recover in the pool. His posture was already correct, and all that remained was to absorb the energy. She turned to him. I watched him meditate in silence. Li Shulai was only slightly behind his mentor. Green waves began to form in the pool. My sister sat down on a chair and began to read a book. She knew that the limit of modern immortality cultivators was the peak of rank 6, and that was exactly what she had achieved by herself. But she had a hunch that Li Shulai would bring change to their world. But I decided to think about it later. Li Shulai continued to meditate silently with his eyes closed. Flames began to form around him. He could feel it getting warmer, but he still didn't open his eyes. His body began to break out in sweat, and light rays appeared all around him. Li Shulai couldn't figure out where the heat came from if the source was cold. He knew that his mentor was somewhere nearby, and he would have to find out about it from her, and he would have to hold on. Flames began to radiate from it all over the room. The teacher opened the lid of the bowl, but those same rays reached her nose. Suddenly, she was in shock, and the bowl abruptly fell to the floor, breaking into pieces. Her face was all red as she lost control of her body. The rays swirled around her, and her body was filled with a strange feeling that never stopped. She began to breathe heavily due to the elevated temperature. Scents began to flow out. Where Xiaoning was standing reading a book about techniques, the rays were right under her feet and began to surround her. But the fragrance still caught her nostrils. She really liked the smell, which was pleasant. But at this moment, she abruptly collapsed to her knees, and her face also turned red, and her body was filled with an unknown feeling. She couldn't stop shaking when she was already sitting on the floor. Xiaoning sensed that something was about to happen. I couldn't help myself. Abruptly, the mentor came to her senses, and she was beginning to recognize the smell. She realized that the smell was coming from Li Shulai. Drops of water curled around her finger. She pointed a finger at him. The water began to wrap around Li Shulai's body. The jet covered his entire body all around. She lightly blew on her finger to dispel the power. Now she realized that his yang energy had leaked out and merged with the energies here, so there was an imbalance. But Li Shulai still had a very strong yang energy, not like the others. Her face was still completely red when she thought about it. She decided to still control the yang energy so that it does not fall into the depths of the body, because the mentor cannot give in to temptation. Sis finally noticed that his scents were leaving the room, and she abruptly remembered that Xiaoning was still standing outside. She quickly ran up, knowing that Xiaoning wouldn't be able to resist this energy. While Li Shulai was meditating in the pool, his sister ran to help. She quickly opened the doors. I was shocked by what I saw. Xiaoning was already lying on the floor, covered in sweat, under the influence of his energy. She immediately activated the ability again, and her finger glowed with a blue light. Sis wrapped a stream of water around Xiaoning's body to help her. Her eyes began to slowly close as her mind calmed down. And after Sis let out a sigh of relief that she was able to sort out the problem. But she could feel the yang energy filling her body. Her hands shook until she couldn't resist. Her face is flushed, and she knows that the energy is too powerful. Eventually, she let go and exhaled. Some time passed. But I didn't find my mentor around. He had been asking for this position all day, so his entire back was stiff, and he started to warm up. Suddenly, he looked down in surprise, not understanding what was going on, but his body had improved noticeably. Li Shulai thought that this was the breakthrough, which caused the 5 senses to sharpen. At this moment, footsteps were heard from behind. His sister congratulated him on his first breakthrough, which put him in the foundation stage. He immediately noticed that her face was too red. Li Shulai didn't really understand what the foundation stage meant. The little sister modestly explained that this was the first stage of cultivation, where one should start one's path as an immortal cultivator. Cultivators absorb the energy of heaven and earth, storing it in their bodies. And when it becomes enough, quantitative changes lead to qualitative ones, and then they come to the stage of laying the foundations. But if something goes wrong during the breakthrough, then the reverse process may start, and the channels may break, and the cultivation will end. And in the case of a successful breakthrough, the channels will be strengthened to move to the next stage of cultivation. His sister ordered him to clean up properly and prepare for tomorrow's official training, and she inadvertently hinted that he should finally get dressed. Li Shulai had completely forgotten that he was sitting in the pool without any clothes on. He immediately began to cover up, feeling ashamed of his behavior. My sister began to walk away down the stairs in silence. She thought about it, not expecting him to make a breakthrough thanks to the source, because other cultivators needed a special pill. Even she herself sat in the spring for a week before the breakthrough. And ordinary people usually spend about a year to realize the presence of spiritual roots in their bodies, but he himself said that everything is new for him. Her face abruptly turned into contentment as she began to giggle. The laughter turned into a frenzy as she realized that she had found a genius. Her laughter could be heard even in the other rooms. Li Shulai just thought everyone in the temple was weird. They sat down on chairs. My sister reminded me that as a mentor, she has certain privileges. Li Shulai knew this very well. And his eyes lit up, and he was ready to cook anything for her. He knew that it was only because of her that he had reached the foundation stage. His mentor stared at him in silence. She felt that the yang energy had stopped coming out, and she could feel it, but the effects were still there. My sister got up from her chair and walked slowly over to him. She reminded him to hurry up and feed her. The whole situation had almost led to disaster, but Li Shulai's face radiated calm, so she didn't want to tell him about it. Li Shulai accepted the order to start cooking immediately. After a while, they went to the kitchen. There, Li Shulai was standing by the stove. Shulai wondered what to make for his sister. He was already frying vegetables in a pan. From the look of it, he judged that tofu would suit her best, and she would be satisfied. He could cook about 10 meals for 3 of them, intending to consider today a holiday since he had entered the laying stage. But while he was cooking, Xiaoning was standing around the corner and peeking. Shulai didn't expect such a request, but he decided to refuse to help. She offered to help while she had free time. So Xiaoning didn't wait for his response and went into the kitchen. She picked up the vegetables to chop while he was already roasting them. Xiaoning spent the whole day studying and reading manuals, but then abruptly fell asleep and woke up in bed. Her face flushed as she recalled the strange dream. But there she was standing in front of a wall. Suddenly, hands appeared behind her. It was Li Shulai who hugged her from behind, and he held out her hand to the wall. The two of them pressed down on the wall, causing a crack to appear. And after the crack, they abruptly kissed. Her dream was filled with vivid sensations, like a ship at sea or a volcano. At that moment, her body was filled with an unusual energy that disappeared, and she thought that she had managed to train in her sleep. But she couldn't see the guy's face at all, but she knew for sure that it was Li Shulai. She was very confused that she had such strange fantasies in her head. Abruptly, she tossed the cucumber to the floor to clear her thoughts. Li Shulai looked at her, not understanding her behavior. She started to leave without forgetting the vegetables, but she ordered him to do it on his own. Xiaoning stayed outside and stood by the door. Li Shulai was shocked with her behavior, finding it sick. Grandma Xiaoning said that Shulai had already broken through to the foundation stage, but she still couldn't make it. And she needed some time, even though she couldn't keep up with his progress. She covered her face with her hands, knowing that she still felt sympathy for him. But when she glanced at Shulai, he didn't look angry at all and just kept cooking. Li Shulai was satisfied with his cooking, and because of the breakthrough, his perception was much better. Even so, he felt that Xiaoning was spying on him. The vegetables sizzled in the pan while they were roasting. He spoke to her without even turning around, and she didn't expect that. Xiaoning was shocked, not understanding how he noticed her. Shulai asked her not to hide anymore. She started to stutter, but denied that she was here for him. Li Shulai wasn't interested in it before, but now he was above her in rank, and he had to pay attention to her actions. He took her hand, asking her to tell him about her worries. Xiaoning was shocked by the sharp touch, and her cheeks immediately turned red. She couldn't say a word and immediately ran away. Li Shulai didn't expect such a reaction either. She ran away, not understanding what was happening to her, because he just took her hand. Xiaoning tried to bring her thoughts to their senses, telling them not to give in to him. And I concluded that it was just the effect of his energy. Li Shulai looked at her, thinking that this behavior was childish. But he knew that he was already over 30 years old, and she was just past the age of 20, so it was only natural that her actions seemed childish to him. After a while, he set the table with various dishes. They sat down to dinner together, and his sister praised him for his work. Li Shulai felt that she had done much more for him. He glanced at Xiaoning. who was silently eating with a dark face, realizing that she was still angry. Sis pondered and found a solution to remove the blockage of the Xiaoning channels. She immediately perked up, determined to do everything possible for this. But Grandma didn't respond with words, only pointing at Li Shulai. Xiaoning had no idea what she was talking about. Her grandmother suggested that she make him her partner. Xiaoning's cheeks instantly turned red with shame. She screamed, not knowing where such thoughts came from, but her grandmother could clearly see her feelings towards Zhulai. Xiaoning jumped up from her chair, denying all of her grandmother's words. Li Shulai himself knew that Xiaoning liked him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have resented the fact that he didn't like her anymore. Grandma taunted Xiaoning when she saw the obvious. Xiaoning doubtfully stated that she didn't like him, but inside she knew that it was a good option to use pair cultivation to promote the relationship. My grandmother sighed heavily. She placed her chopsticks on the table, knowing that the matter of pair cultivation depended on their wishes. My sister just decided to suggest it, but it was already important. Xiaoning decided to postpone this dialogue and just eat quietly, interrupting her grandmother's words. Li Shulai admitted that he just wanted to get stronger and was looking for better ways. His sister looked at him in silence. Although he looked like an ordinary guy, he wasn't simple at all, and he would definitely become a real cultivator in the future. My sister decided to think of something else. Xiaoning froze in shock that he had turned down the offer so easily. There was a drama inside her, telling herself that she didn't want to do it herself, but she wanted to get help from him in cultivating. Her chopsticks pierced right through the rice as she was bursting with negative feelings. Grandma saw what was happening to Xiaoning. Xiaoning was sad now because he had missed out on the opportunity to establish a relationship with her, so he was also building it with other girls. She thought it would be nice to bathe in the spring in the evening, but Li Shulai's heart was closed. My grandmother suggested that I think about her cultivation later, but now I need to eat. She herself didn't expect that a disciple would miss out on such a unique cultivation chance. Xiaoning resigned herself sadly. Later, the little sister decided to take Li Shulai to the secret library. She whirled around to face them. Xiaoning suddenly stopped walking. She confessed that she wasn't feeling well and decided to send them to the library alone, not wanting to see Zhulai again. Her grandmother decided to send her on vacation. They went to Qingyun Hall, the secret library. My sister told me that all sorts of cultivation items were displayed on the first floor. And on the second floor, there was a training hall. My sister advised me to start with practice and go around the first and third floors later. She picked up an unknown book from the shelf. He already had a stack of basic books in his hands that he needed to read before the end of next week. My sister explained that he had joined too late, so it was worth trying. Li Shulai promised that there would be no problems, but he didn't expect such difficulties. She directly asked him why he had decided to give up pear cultivation, since such a chance was rare. Sis assumed that he hated Xiaoning. Li Shulai recalled how Xiaoning hated him in her previous life, but he couldn't admit it, so he asked her to keep it a secret. She didn't expect such an answer and turned around. Li Shulai considered falling in love to be a waste of time. There were too many interesting things in the world, so for now, he wanted to cultivate and develop in business. Sis could sense that his breathing and pulse were stable, so it didn't seem like a lie. He was mature, but he still gave up on falling in love. Suddenly, she realized that he might be impotent. She stopped abruptly and offered to help with his situation. They continued walking in the secret library on the second floor. My sister explained that money is important for a career, but not for her. And she finally found what she was looking for, finding a basket full of cards. Li Shulai didn't understand what it was. They were gifts given to her by her followers, and she didn't check how much money was in them. He couldn't believe his eyes, considering it a gift from heaven. Now it was clear that help didn't always come from practicing immortality. It turned out that my sister was a millionaire. Li Shulai didn't expect that the virtues that help immortals reach the peak of cultivation could also bring a fortune. Tears of happiness filled his eyes as he realized what a good person his sister was. He took out one of the cards from the basket, but he still promised to return it later. He was shocked that the basket was taking up more space. Li Shulai felt the thoughts of rich aunts for the first time. It was as if he was flying in the clouds and in dreams. His sister said that after reading all the books, he would be able to feel relieved. Li Shulai accepted her request. The next day came. He sat and meditated again. Zhulai exhaled slowly. His sister decided to teach him how to breathe properly because it was not so easy. Li Shulai accepted her challenges with a smile. The lesson was already over, and Xiaoning was already waiting for him. Zhulai thanked his mentor, intending to see her in a week. After a while, they were on their way home by car. Xiaoning was still annoyed and sat by the side. Li Shulai immediately noticed her silent anger. Li Shulai suddenly turned to her, not understanding what was happening to her. She didn't answer him, thinking the answer was obvious, and she didn't sleep all night. Xiaoning deduced that he wanted to cut off all ties with her. She tried to say something, but her words were cut off, and she turned away again, her face red. Xiaoning knew that he liked her before and wanted to hear it again. Li Shulai didn't hide it, but that was all in the past. Her teeth clenched in anger. Li Shulai easily replied that he didn't like her right now. Although he looked to be in his 20s, he was already well into his 40s, and he was only attracted to girls in stockings with beautiful legs. Even more, he dreamed. Xiaoning's hands were clenched and shaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as she noticed his attitude towards Kexin, noticing his looks at her. Li Shulai wasn't going to put up with this nonsense, explaining that she was his idol. To him, she was a deity from heaven to be worshipped. He allowed himself to be insulted, but not his idols, because one day Kexin would become part of the literary world and become famous all over China, and he wanted to help her in everything. Xiaoning didn't look at him, not understanding what was wrong with being able to write novels. She didn't know who she was if Kexin was a goddess. Li Shulai was interested in such a strange question. Xiaoning watched him laugh at her, not understanding what was wrong. He just asked them not to take him seriously because they were now a mentor and a student, so there can't be a relationship between them. Zulai thought that it was also time for her to find meaning in life, and since she was the granddaughter of the mentor, it was also time for her to grow up, and he could help her with that. Li Shulai, and this, in fact, was a big problem. The country was now rapidly developing and did not care about its citizens at all. And if you want to show your success, then you can be useful to society. Because of this, you need to study hard. The development of power was directly dependent on technology, and if hard power was not enough to become influential on the international stage, soft power comes in handy. Young people now needed to look to the future and try their best. Li Shulai truly wanted to help the state, and Xiaoning listened to his speech with huge eyes. She couldn't understand what he was discussing at all, and I took it as a way to politely refuse. Xiaoning reminded him that that wasn't what she was asking at all. Li Shulai knew very well that she should listen, or it would get worse. It was already Monday and school days had begun. Xiaoning was sitting with a friend in the library. A friend reached out to her, noticing her worries. But it wasn't her graduation that Xiaoning was worried about. My friend tried to learn more from her, but Xiaoning didn't want to answer at all. She herself was worried that they wouldn't have time to redo the diploma before the end of May, so she advised them to focus on it. But at this moment, she noticed something. Li Shulai was walking through the library with Kexin, who was giggling at his jokes. The two of them were shocked that he came with a girl together. Xiaoning immediately rushed towards them. Her friend realized that she was very worried about Li Shulai. Xiaoning stared blankly in their direction. Her friend decided to strongly ask if she liked Zulai. She couldn't understand when he had changed so much and given up so easily, denying true love. The friend was confused that she was sorry when she turned him down. She reminded him that Li Shulai had been chasing her for more than 3 years, but Xiaoning didn't want to realize it. Since childhood, Xiaoning has been the jewel of the family, studied well, and was the teacher's favorite, but he still doesn't look at her like he used to. He had even given up on pear cultivation, and she knew that her grandmother wouldn't have offered this option just like that. Her friend couldn't even respond to the situation. Xiaoning tearfully turned to her friend, not understanding what she had done. She didn't understand why she was dragging it out for so long and making him chase. Xiaoning recognized Li Shulai in her words, but she thought he was a complete scumbag. Her friend already knew that Xiaoning had a crush on Shulai, but she continued to deny it, not understanding how it was possible. Her scream was interrupted by a guy who reminded her to keep the library quiet. She immediately covered her mouth, not realizing how loud she was talking. Xiaoning began to introspect, comparing herself to Kexin even though she was better at everything. A friend insistently asked to study for a diploma. She pretended to believe Xiaoning, reminding him how she had rejected him out of indifference. I asked her to finally calm down. She thought that Li Shulai should come running back in a couple of days. Xiaoning realized that her friend was right, and it was all just an act. But she wasn't going to give him a chance if he came back. Her friend praised her and patted her. Li Shulai, meanwhile, went to the bank. He doubted there was anyone in this era who would give money away like this. The card was inserted into the ATM, and I had no doubt that there would be at least $10,000 on the card. He clicked on the balance button to check it, but I was speechless when I saw the amount. The screen showed the sum of 10 million. And each card was filled with similar amounts. He was bursting with shock inside, even though his face remained neutral. Li Shulai couldn't believe that she had surpassed Fei Long financially. All the cards were filled with millions. Li Shulai started to remember that he was now a reborn. And because of this, I got up at the crack of dawn to write a program. I was even able to become popular by entering a narrow circle. He was definitely a hero now. Li Shulai decided to calm his head. He was convinced that everyone should earn their own money, but the money didn't belong to him. Moreover, if he throws money around, they will quickly run out. He should have learned not only to earn money, but also to live honestly. So he clenched his fist, knowing that it would be the right thing to do. He left the ATM, I was going to collect the money when the time came. Mr. Liu was informed that this month's report was published. The company's turnover is down 10%, and if this continues, it will probably lose all its money. Liu Daxi held his head, knowing that this couldn't be allowed to happen. He did not understand how to increase popularity because the development of electronic goods was already at its peak. Suddenly, memories popped up in his head. Li Shalai said that electronics has its own logistics, and it can increase at any time. I gave him a card if he needed help. Liu Daxi picked up the card and looked at it carefully. It was Li Shalai's business card. He couldn't believe it was real. But he put the card back. Liu Daxi stared out the window and thought about Fei Long's technology. And I assumed that this would spread to the west. Meanwhile, Yang Feilong was racing for a new peak in his company's turnover. All the guests were happy, going to drink to the bottom. In his mind, it was only Li Shalai who had given him this opportunity. In such a short time, Fei Long Company has gained new popularity, taking the first place, and has become a leader in its field. He was looking out the window intently, and he wondered what other surprises lay ahead. Li Shalai was choosing the design of his new home, and he reminded me that yesterday I chose another layout. He was sure that he would not be so lucky in the 21st century, and that was very sad news. Li Shalai offered to sign the contract first and then pay for it. The girl promised to solve the formalities within a week. He almost cried with happiness, knowing that he was rich and would have his own house. None of the consultants could believe that Li Shalai would be so generous, and they were even able to choose from almost identical options. She herself understood that the houses he bought were criminal, or animals lived there, so they easily bred him. Li Shalai could feel the girl looking down on him, but she still didn't understand anything. The current system provides compensation for living in such houses, and in the future, housing prices will fly through the roof. So this is the easiest investment. He bought houses so that later he would not be left without money, especially now it is sold at an affordable price. Li Shalai decided to come out from another exit. Everyone was laughing at them now, but after a while, he might even be able to pay back all his investments. And that would only happen in a couple of months when the government started a new program. He was sure that he would not harm anyone and chose what no one would buy for sure. The next day, early in the morning, he went to the park. He sat in a lotus position on a bench, thinking about the demolition that would see the government negotiate with the landlords. It was a very time-consuming process, and it is very hard to fight with greedy people. That's why families were so rich in the past life. So it's worth learning how to negotiate so that you don't fall into the abyss. He was sure that many families regretted not being able to talk properly so that they could earn more. Li Shalai thought that it was better not to argue for a few thousand and just agree to a new home. And when prices rise, it can be sold. Li Shalai was going to sign the contract ahead of schedule and earn money before others and immediately return the money to his mentor. He could already imagine giving his sister the gold. His face was covered in sweat as his eyes snapped open. He got up from the bench and stretched, finishing his training, preparing to take up his diploma. Later, he came to the office of Professor Guo, who gave a good assessment of his diploma. Li Shalai was asking if any corrections were needed, while he was secretly glad that he had completed his diploma. Even questions about the success of the Fei Long Company did not put him in such a dead end. He spent several months on this diploma. Professor Guo slapped the table, announcing that the diploma was now good, and Li Shalai couldn't believe his ears. He really considered his work to be of high quality, asking him about his plans for the future. Professor Guo reflected that not only was Shalai a person with excellent professional abilities and high moral standards, but he also patiently corrected the diploma, even though it was originally good. This was quite a rare student, so it is worth supporting his efforts. Moreover, he was one of the reliable ones who helped him in a difficult situation. Li Shalai didn't have a clear plan yet, so he was going to work for a while and then open his own business. Professor Guo praised him for being so motivated. Professor Guo asked him how free he was on Saturday to discuss something and introduce him to someone. Despite his plans for money, he still wasn't going to work in an office. He knew that Professor Guo wasn't just going to introduce him to his friends, so he really believed. Professor Guo has a certain amount of authority in the financial industry, and this was a rare opportunity that couldn't be missed. He just asked me to get ready and keep him company. Later, Li Shalai walked out of the office, and he started writing a letter to his mentor, saying that he would be busy on the weekend, so he wouldn't be able to come. Meanwhile, my sister was lying in the spring and getting high from the warm water, and a message came from behind her. She noticed him immediately. My sister grabbed the paper to read it. Li Shalai was surprised by her response speed. My mentor only asked me not to forget about cultivating. The weekend finally arrived. Important people gathered in one place. Everyone here has somehow invested in the Fei Long Company and achieved success. Professor Guo and Li Shalai arrived at the event, He couldn't believe he was actually seeing these people. He'd seen them all on the news covers. Li Shilai couldn't believe that the professor had such a high status, even though it didn't look any different from other teachers. Everyone immediately started greeting him. He introduced Li Shilai to his friends. Professor Guo described him as a student with excellent academic performance and was someone who believed in him in a difficult situation and wanted to share his experience with him. A crowd formed around them as everyone took an interest in the young guy that Professor Guo had brought. He asked him not to worry and act as usual, but Li Shilai didn't expect to meet so many bigwigs. Everyone offered to sit down at the table already, being hungry. Li Shilai sat the professor down first. At heart, he was already in his 40s, so it was very nice to be in the company of people his own age. After a while, he was sitting drunk with a new companion. He began to tell proverbs about his life experience. The man was very moved by his behavior, assuring that Yulai would become stronger. He immediately noticed the blonde head. He only regretted that they hadn't met earlier, and Li Shilai asked him to call later to learn more about his business activities. The man asked him about his future plans, but Li Shilai hadn't decided yet. He handed them his business card, telling them to come at any time. Wang Jianling was already sitting in front of him, wanting to carry out his plans and asking Li Shilai for help. Professor Guo remarked that Zulai wasn't like ordinary students at all, and it was worth keeping in touch with him. Li Shilai's communication was simple, but suddenly he noticed something. There was an unknown girl sitting at the table who was acting very cold and detached. She didn't even say a word the entire time, but she was watching him closely. Suddenly their eyes met, and the two of them turned away from each other, embarrassed. The men slammed their glasses together, intending to drink to the dregs. They were already drunk out of their wits, but they continued to get together anyway. Li Shilai was also sitting down and drinking from his glass. The unknown girl didn't join in the fun by reading a book. In the end, she just closed it. She started trying to wake her father up so that he would wake up. She felt uneasy that her father was so drunk and didn't wake up, but he didn't want to get up, asking not to be interrupted. The girl didn't know what to do or say. She started looking around, worried about staying in this company. Uncle Wang was also already asleep on the table. Others followed suit too, and she didn't know what to do now, and she really wanted to go to the bathroom. Her father had never been so drunk before. She really wanted to go to the bathroom. There were tears in her eyes because she couldn't take it anymore. At that moment, he looked at the girl again, remembering that she was just reading a book all the time, but now she stopped, and her face was strange. He wondered if she might want to pee like a child. The girl kept clutching her skirt because she couldn't take it anymore. She was begging for someone to help her. At this moment, Li Shilai walked up to her and immediately asked her to accompany her to the toilet. Because of his words, he froze in horror at what a strange thing he said under the influence of alcohol. He screamed from inside, realizing that he had never said such a thing before. Li Shilai understood what it looked like a grown man inviting a girl to use the toilet. The girl agreed to help him, knowing that this is her opportunity. He was shocked that she agreed so easily. Li Shilai decided to ask again so as not to confuse her answer. She really wanted to go to the bathroom, so she immediately agreed. And Li Shilai was glad that he hadn't misheard, so he suggested that we go already. The girl got up from her chair, intending to walk him to the bathroom. Li Shilai felt how strange it all sounded. The girl was looking around in strange company. There were unknown men everywhere, and she was afraid. Li Shilai didn't understand why she was so skittish, but she suddenly spoke up. And she asked me to be a little slower. He agreed, but thought it was a terrible request. In his mind, they looked like a teacher and a child. Finally, they came to the bathroom, and Li Shilai immediately sent her inside, intending to wait outside. The girl did not argue and decided to go to the toilet. She walked with her hands on her skirt. Tears were already streaming from her eyes as she walked slowly. Li Shilai decided to take a moment to wash his hands. He felt like a pervert for taking a stranger to the bathroom. The girl later cautiously left the toilet. She headed for the main exit. Li Shilai stood quietly behind her. She greeted him immediately. She announced that she was out of the bathroom and ready to go back. Li Shilai smiled at her as he prepared to leave. They started walking again, only this time the situation was even more awkward. He truly thought her strange, but I decided to turn around and introduce myself so it wouldn't be so awkward. The girl suddenly screamed, but she already knew his name because she had heard it at the table. Li Shilai began to wonder what she liked to do, remembering how she used to read a book at the table. She said it was a fantasy novel. He hadn't expected this to be an ordinary romance, and his questions made him uneasy. Li Shilai was abruptly afraid that she would be interested in him if she found out that he was a cultivator. He decided to go to her. But then I changed my mind about asking her about it. He had never been so silent in his entire life. He suggested that they continue their silence so as not to incur retribution. They finally returned to the table, so he decided to take a peek at her book. The girl was reading a book about a fallen princess and 18 handsome men. He was in shock, realizing that he shouldn't have worried about himself. It really was a fantasy novel. It was something that modern girls liked. It was already night outside. The crowd abruptly spilled out of the entrance. Li Shulai was dragging the drunk Professor Guo by his arm. At that moment, he heard a voice and turned his head. The girl asked if he would come back next time, but it wasn't accurate. He explained that after graduation, he will be very busy at work. The girl was visibly upset by his answer, but he offered to see her at the university if she wanted to. She was glad that he had suggested an alternative. The taxi was moving fast on the night highway. He and Professor Guo were riding in the back seat together, and he was holding a card in his hands. He'd made a lot of useful acquaintances that evening, and now it was clear why people were trying so hard to get to this dinner. There were a lot of old and influential people there. He recalled how the old people forced him to drink. Otherwise, they were not ready to let him go. Everyone was happy to meet him, but they kept insisting on a drink. And if he drinks, they can become real partners. He was raising glasses with everyone else. Li Shulai looked out the window, realizing that the old people had drunk too much and would hardly remember dinner today, and perhaps all contact would be useless. But when they were sober, they would appreciate it. The rest was just a pretense, and it was a concept from his previous life. Li Shulai didn't know what would happen now, but I decided to pass the responsibility to fate and time. At that moment, he remembered something, that thanks to his intervention, IT business is entering the era of high-speed development. And he had no doubt that Lu Daxi had already felt it for himself, but for some reason he hadn't contacted him yet. He is quite intelligent and far-sighted, so he should have understood the implications long ago. And Li Shulai was worried that he might have made a mistake, or maybe Lu Daxi had lost his business card. The next day came. After a while, Professor Guo ordered the students to make corrections faster and asked them to tell everything carefully. Zhang Ming shouted sharply at the entire class. He lay down on his desk, not knowing what to do with the diploma that the professor had rejected. Li Shulai didn't even know what to say to him. It was even more frustrating, but it was true. In the previous life, due to Professor Guo's death, the defense was chaotic, and Zhang Ming almost stayed for the second year. But in this life, it will be even less sweet for him. He clung like a tick, demanding a solution. Zhang Ming remembered that Li Shulai had already passed his diploma and asked for his help for such a long friendship. Then Li Shulai suggested that we go to the library and look at the work. Zhang Ming burst into tears and snot when he finally agreed to help him. Li Shulai pushed the infuriating friend away. Abruptly, he reached out to kiss her, declaring his love for her. But Li Shulai tried to chase him away because he was disgusted. During the day, Xiao Ning and his girlfriend secretly observed Kexin. Her friend assumed that she was waiting under a tree for some guy and remembered that Zulai also lives here. Suddenly, Kexin met up with Li Shulai, and the girls were scared that they were going on a date. They didn't know what to do, but Xiao Ning decided to continue her surveillance. The girls followed closely behind the couple. Kexin was telling Li Shulai about a new novel she had written that she wanted him to take a look at. Li Shulai was filled with the motivation to take a quick look at him. He was glad that he managed to become a friend of the future celebrity, and now he is aware of all the changes and acts as the first reader. Kexin could see the light in his eyes as he read it. There was a pleasant feeling in her chest, and her cheeks were a little flushed. She was truly happy. Shoning at the next table was clutching her chopsticks in anger. She threw everything on the table. She was very sick to look at these cute couple. Xiaoning stood up, her face dark, and her whole body shaking. Her friend didn't know what to say. Li Shulai didn't look at her once, even when she purposely passed by. She couldn't believe he liked the sheets any better than she did. Kexin watched the glowing Zulai. It was as if a bright light was radiating from them. Xiaoning was almost blinded by the light, and it began to wash away from such brightness. She abruptly inserted the chopsticks into the rice, not understanding how he could not look at her. Xiaoning recalled that she was his disciple, and now they are connected. Her friend looked at her aggression with a sigh, and I knew it wasn't a good day. Xiaoning knew that Li Shulai only wanted to please Kexin and had completely forgotten about the others. Her friend started driving right in front of her face with her hand. I didn't know where she was looking while they discussed the future after graduation. Xiaoning finally came to her senses. She asked for time to think. Her friend thought it was too late to think about such an important thing. Xiaoning wanted to go back to her grandfather and help him, and then go to graduate school. The friend said that her family had found her a job in a bank, and she would probably be a cashier. Xiaoning looked away with a sad look. Li Shulai was still sitting and chatting nicely with Kexin. She started asking her friend, claiming that Kexin was also quite cute. The friend was shocked by such an unexpected question. She didn't think she was so pretty, and her family wasn't like that. But she was fond of poetry and calligraphy, and everyone thought she was a real talent, and they praised her for the skill of her work. Xiaoning started to push herself, realizing that he liked well-read girls, and he had advised her to study harder last time. so she tried very hard. She remembered him talking about their relationship as a student and teacher. Her fist was clenching, and she assumed that everything was ruined because of his meeting with Kexin. Xiaoning's face changed expression every couple of seconds. Her friend didn't know how to react to all this. Xiaoning tried to tell herself that Li Shulai wasn't that good and didn't deserve her. Her friend had originally told her the same thing. And suddenly she started talking about the Feilong company. Xiaoning naturally knew about it. It was the leader of IT companies, which was recognized as the most potential organization, and its market capitalization was more than 500 million. No one would have thought that in just 3 years the company would become a leader. A friend discovered an interesting person among the creators of Feilong 2 days ago, and then couldn't sleep for 2 whole days. Xiaoning didn't understand what she was talking about. The friend recalled how she had been looking for a job for 2 days, and when she searched for information, she found the name of Li Shulai in the lists of the creators of Feilong. His family is ordinary, but he turned out to be a shareholder with a large balance on the account. He would only increase it in the future, and it was fun. Xiaoning was angry that he wasn't a loser. Her friend was already annoyed by her emotional swing. She knew that Li Zhilai had cultivated immortality and already came out above many in status. To strive for immortality, money was something that was outside the body, and he had outstanding talents, so his future is limitless. Xiaoning was sad that she hadn't crossed the threshold yet, and he had already overcome a lot of things. Despite his ordinary family, he is doing well in his studies and is now the only one who was able to defend his diploma. My friend decided to end this strange conversation. Xiaoning was getting more and more frustrated that Li Shulai was so talented and that he was also helping others. He was not terrible in appearance and knew how to cook deliciously. Xiaoning continued to list its advantages, but her sentence was interrupted. She realized that she had unconsciously listed its benefits, and her face flushed. Her friend stiffened. She smirked, reminding her that Xiaoning had already finished her lunch a long time ago. Xiaoning blushed all over, realizing that she had eaten the entire meal, but she didn't notice it herself. Her friend heard all her words. She claimed that it was all Zhang Ming's words. Her friend didn't understand who Xiaoning was trying to deceive. She changed the subject, ordering them to continue eating. Li Shulai had already finished reading her novel, and his eyes were filled with tears from such a touching story. The text was simple and original. He was bursting with the desire to praise Kexin. He wondered if he had given her an incentive to continue writing, since he hadn't seen the novel in his previous life. But confidence was very important in her work. He immediately started praising her fine work, intending to buy it when it was fully released. Kexin hadn't expected such a bright reaction. Li Shulai admitted that he was very moved and touched by her work. She was starting to feel uneasy at the amount of praise, but inside she couldn't believe it. Li Shulai suddenly squeezed her hands, admitting that this was the best job of his life. He even considered it the best work of their era, glad that they lived in the same time. He asked her to immediately submit the work for publication, which will make it more popular. Kexin abruptly released his hand. She began to straighten her hair and felt ashamed. Li Shulai also felt uneasy from such vivid emotions that he couldn't hold back. She admitted that she had already chosen 3 publishers, but did not know which one would be more suitable, but she is glad that she has a choice. So she handed him a piece of paper, asking for his help in choosing, listing all the advantages and disadvantages. Li Shulai took the paper from his hand. The list included the Haiqing Literature Publishing House, the Shizhu Monthly Magazine, and the small Haiqing magazine. The first publishing house was not so popular, but soon it will gain popularity and take the lead. But he still suggested that she choose a small magazine, but did not force her to listen to the advice. Kexin confidently decided to choose Haiqing. He was surprised that she didn't even ask any question, but she truly believed in his choice because he always gave good ideas. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the table. Xiaoning was bursting with anger and wanted to leave the dining hall faster. Her lunch was full, as if she hadn't eaten a single bite. But Xiaoning resolutely got up from her chair. She said that she decided to lose weight. The friend realized that this was a lie. Xiaoning started to leave resolutely. She walked angrily past their table. Her cheeks were red and her teeth were bared. Her friend saw her strange reaction. She smiled slyly, not expecting Xiaoning to be so jealous. Li Shulai noticed that she was angry again, but he didn't understand why. Kexin noticed that he was thinking about something, but he decided not to bring it up and forget it. Xiaoning heard his words as if he didn't care about her. Her fist clenched in aggression. She was angry that he didn't care so much about her. Later, he went to the library. Zhang Ming called his friend to sit down with good wishes. Li Shulai suggested that we start by looking for a reference book, and he began rummaging through the bookshelves. After a while, he took out one of the books. He lowered himself to the shelf, and as he was taking out the book, he noticed something behind the shelf. At the library table, the same girl from dinner was sitting with a book in her hands. He was shocked to recognize Wei Yu, who was also a graduate. In her hands was another book. His eyesight has improved since he started cultivating, so he can now notice more. Last time she had read a book about 18 guys, but now there were 38 of them in the book. He was shocked by her tastes. He decided to walk behind her so as not to distract her, but he sat down carefully beside her. He definitely looked right into her book. The relationship between the characters was described there. Li Shilai was shocked that there were so many things. He sat next to her for a while. Zhang Ming also waited for him for a very long time. Not understanding where he had gone, he decided to get up and go find Zulai. But when I saw it, I was shocked. Li Shilai was already sitting with an unknown girl, forgetting about his friend. He finally became disillusioned with it, deciding to study on his own. Wang Yu finally closed her book. She sat there with a calm smile. Finally, she looked the other way. Her eyes widened visibly in shock. She blushed as she realized that Li Shilai was sitting next to her, and it wasn't clear how long ago. Now she didn't know what to say. Wang Yu was uncomfortably surprised by this coincidence, and it felt like the plot of a novel. Li Shilai was also surprised by the coincidence. She smiled tenderly, once again surprised at his kindness. Li Shilai asked if she had found the book in the library, and Wang Yu confirmed it. He confessed to her that he actually came here to help a classmate with his graduation work, and he promised that someday he would look at this book that she was reading. Li Shilai inquired about her graduation status, and she said with a smile that he had already been accepted. He started asking about her plans after graduation, but she hadn't thought of it yet, and she answered with hesitation. Her father said that it was only worth doing what she wanted. Li Shilai didn't expect anything else, but he immediately noticed her shaking hands. Wang Yu was surprised that he wanted to chat with her. When he walked her to the bathroom, she immediately took him for a good person, and she was going to try to do the same. Zulai didn't see anything wrong with it at all. Wang Yu decided to just continue reading. He gave her a sidelong glance. The girl was very shy, so it was hard to talk to her. Wang Yu asked if he liked books. Li Shilai preferred to say yes, and she abruptly started talking about the new writer Liao Kexin. He hadn't expected this. Wang Yu said that she is studying at the same university. Li Shilai was horrified that Kexin was causing them to grow closer, and he couldn't believe that Wang Yu had even started a dialogue herself. He admitted that he had read a couple of her manuscripts and reacted more calmly, so as not to frighten her. Wang Yu put the book back on the table, and she began to wonder what he liked best. Li Shilai explained that he liked everything, but he had to choose, and he preferred his favorite debut work, Tide. Wang Yu suddenly began to cry bitter tears. Li Shilai watched in shock at her instantaneous change of emotions. He couldn't figure out what had happened in a matter of seconds, and he couldn't help her, because he didn't even have napkins. He took her by the shoulder. Li Shilai started asking what exactly happened. Wang Yu expressed her conclusion that he was her soulmate, and Liao Kexin's soulmate, because he was the only one who had read the Tide. He felt uneasy that this was the whole reason for her sobbing. All her friends had read the Tide, but they still didn't understand, so they didn't like it, and she didn't like it very much. So she suggested that we become friends. She held out her little finger. Li Shilai hugged her little finger with his own, knowing that such like-minded people were rare in life. He thought she was very strange, but also cute, and he liked her childish behavior. Wang Yu smiled so tenderly that they even sealed their friendly agreement. Li Shilai decided that this was the right time, and he admitted that he was friends with Liao Kexin, suggesting that the three of them get together in their free time. Her face lit up with happiness when she heard this. Li Shilai didn't want to lie to his friends. She immediately gave him a big hug, declaring him her very best friend. Li Shilai looked down in surprise, and his cheeks were flushed as he tried to push her away, because they were in the library. But her grip was very tight. Wang Yu pulled away. She looked up into his eyes with a slight flush on her cheeks. She asked if she could just call him by his first name. Li Shilai started to stutter, but immediately agreed. He turned away abruptly, knowing she'd drugged him. Night had already fallen. Li Shilai came back to the dorm, but he had the distinct feeling that he had forgotten something. Zhang Ming was sitting on a chair facing the door, and annoyingly reminded what time it was on the clock. The bag fell out of his hands. He froze in place like a statue, realizing that he had forgotten about his own friend. Zhang Ming was willing to stay on the bench and fail the exam for Shulai's happiness. Li Shilai awkwardly tried to explain that he had something to do today and promised to help tomorrow. But Zhang Ming knew that he had simply forgotten about it. He started asking about the case with that girl from the library, and already he felt uneasy that this was the third girl in a row. And it already seemed that Li Shilai was making up for his complexes. He sighed, promising to definitely help. The next day came. Li Shilai met Kexin and Wang Yu at the cafe. Wang Yu sat down with her voice down and was nervous. He could see how scared she was. So Li Shilai decided to start a dialogue by asking Kexin for an autograph. She agreed with a smile. Wang Yu brought several books to sign at once, but then she undid the button, not averse to getting an autograph on the body as well. Kexin laughed awkwardly. After a while, they were served dishes on the table, and they were already starting to communicate well while Li Shulai was sitting on the side. Wang Yu invited her to visit sometime because she had bought all her books, which took up 3 shelves. Kexin was shocked to remember that she had only released a few works. But Wang Yu had 100 copies of each work, but she didn't have any old works, so she hoped for her father's help. Li Shulai was shocked by her fanaticism. After that, Kexin was going to leave first to check out the publishing house. Wang Yu wanted to order her idol a taxi, but she decided to get there on her own. She said that if anything, she can bring and sign the desired book, and you don't have to buy all the copies. In Wang Yu's eyes, she looked like a god. Li Shulai didn't expect to meet someone who was more of a Po Kexin fan than him. The taxi arrived and she said goodbye to them. Wang Yu squealed with happiness at seeing off her idol. She sincerely thanked him for the opportunity. Li Shulai realized that she wasn't lying about her best friend. But Kexin worked wonders, and when she left, Wang Yu started stuttering again. She asked him to contact her if he needed help. Li Shulai suggested that we talk about it later. But I was glad of another favor. Wang Yu only hoped that everything would be fine. It was July 1999. The photographer was counting down. The class took a shared photo. Li Shulai was handed a photocopy. It was his second release after Rebirth, but nothing really changed. But at least Professor Guo was still alive, and the rebirth was already worth it. Li Shulai was glad that the professor was alive, hoping for a normal life for him. Suddenly, he called out to him. He asked me to contact you if you need help. Li Shulai was going to use his connections. The professor noticed that Zulai was worried about him. Li Shulai knew what a wonderful person the professor was, so he didn't worry. But he was going to always remember him. He started saying quotes from important people that he had heard on TV. The professor reminded him that even though he had already become a real member of society, one should not look down on him. Li Shulai immediately apologized. The professor knew that Li Shulai's words would stick in his heart for a long time because he remembered how he wanted to end his life because of difficulties. He reminded that life cannot always go smoothly, and you will have to face many difficulties, but he will definitely cope with everything. Li Shulai resolutely accepted his advice. He went for a walk in the park. Zhangming reached out, thanking him for helping him with his diploma, offering him dinner, but Zulai insisted on helping his father with the business instead. He promised that he would definitely do so. Zhangming couldn't imagine how they could meet up with their classmates like this, going to meet up every half a year. Now all their friends were scattered around the world, and it was hard for him to believe it. Li Shulai reminded him that the means of communication would soon be developed, and everyone would be in touch so that he would stop whining. He decided to tell Po his plans for life. I turned to him. Zhangming was startled by such a serious look, but he still blushed, thinking it was a good idea to spend time together. Li Shulai was shocked that he hadn't noticed his perversions before. I immediately kicked it away. Zhangming fell to the floor, and Zulai spoke to him. The boy turned to look at him. He wished him to reach heights in the future, also intending to boldly go forward and help him with difficulties. Zhangming tried to fight the urge to cry at this speech. He held out his hand, wishing his friend the same. The two friends shook hands. Li Shulai was going to try hard for the good of the future. Some time passed. People stood in front of the woman and complained that the house for migrants did not even have a house, although their house had a good location and a lot of sunlight. The men were indignant. They lived in their homes for decades, but now the state has decided to demolish all the houses. It required guarantees that the shortcomings would be corrected. At this moment, Li Shulai began to push the crowd aside and signed the man a contract. He handed it back to the woman. No one could understand what he was signing. She congratulated him on receiving compensation and the right to choose a home. The woman grabbed his arm, urging him to continue fighting for his rights. And I was surprised that he didn't even fight and sold it cheap. But Li Shulai had already firmly made up his mind. He explained that housing prices are rising and there are investment opportunities everywhere. And it is better not to fight for emptiness, but to get money for demolition and use it for investment. Moreover, they are given the right to choose a better apartment. The man was sure that his many years of experience speaks for itself, and they know better. He just sighed, deciding not to press the point. He started to walk away while everyone watched him go. The man was sure that he just lost everything and was trying to pull others along with him. But someone even noticed the meaning in his words. He thought the neighbor was buying the guy's words. Li Shulai was leaving while everyone was still arguing. A whole month later, he was sitting under a tree and meditating. His meditation was interrupted by a phone call. He picked up the phone and was informed that the houses had been prepared and he could see the apartments. Li Shulai didn't expect them to do it so quickly. It was a reward for the first group of people to sign the consent form to start their work. He slowly lowered the phone. He had almost 8 million yen and 10 houses, and everything was still ahead of him. He tasted the richness of the future. After all, he saw them as real money that was earned through the use of benefits and information. He was walking in the park and met some men playing backgammon. I watched them play. Li Shulai immediately intervened, advising them to make a different move. The man was shocked that the guy just got into the game instead of quietly watching. He apologized, explaining that he did it because of his earlier violent emotion. Li Shulai was looking forward to not only paying back his sister's debt, but also expanding the business. The man suddenly went into shock. He realized that this move was a masterpiece, and I started arguing to change. Li Shulai decided to leave while they continued to argue about the game. He was happy to have money, especially the money he earns himself. From his second wave of money, Li Shulai spent $1 million to invest in the establishment of a public charity for quadrille fitness classes for the elderly. In their era, there were many people who received $1 million, but they would not invest it in public charitable enterprises. People had a lot of conversations about the identity of the gold genius, and it was said that Hong Kong's investment had increased significantly. It was even said that the richest man's grandfather liked to dance the quadrille, so he invested in the society. The media wanted to interview him, a man who invested in the quadrille dance business, but they didn't have any data on him. The car was actively driving on the road. His second step was to complete the layout. When 10 or 20 years passed, everyone would see the power of the quadrille. For the next half a year, Li Shulai cultivated hard, and he continued to develop business plans, waiting for them to bear fruit. Xiaoning watched him read the newspaper, and I couldn't believe that a 20-year-old young man would invest in a quadrille. My sister was sitting at the table, reading fortunes to an unknown man. Li Shulai decided that his sister was going to earn money from fortune-telling. But even from behind, the man looked painfully familiar. Li Shulai recognized Yang Feilong. Feilong was also surprised to meet his master. It was now clear that his rapid success was due to his sister, and Zulai had appeared so suddenly because he was her disciple. He imagined that someone from above saw his great destiny and sent Li Shulai to help him. Feilong couldn't wait for his sister's prediction. She said that for 20 years there would be no substitute for Feilong. He jumped, wondering what would happen after that. Feilong assumed some trouble, or Feilong's technology would abruptly stop developing. He was going to pay even more for her to suggest a solution to his problem. My sister explained that it wasn't about money and that you had to overcome all the hardships that heaven gave you. She ordered Zulai to escort her guest out while he was trying to say something. Li Shulai told Feilong not to bother his sister and suggested that they talk on the way. Yang Feilong had completely forgotten that Zulai was a disciple of Sis, so he was also a great person. He bowed, apologizing for his rudeness. The two men walked out of the temple, and Feilong asked if Shulai knew how to predict, but he already knew that in 20 years, Yang Feilong would be doomed. He was trying to find out exactly what was going to happen. Li Shulai explained that the root cause was laid down in the past 2 decades, but did not want to talk about it, and advised to remain as wise as possible to deal with the problem on your own. He decided to suggest that he take not just one step, but as much as possible in order to learn some things on his own. Li Shulai wasn't going to sit idly by, since Feilong was going to give a big help to China's development, and he wanted to share a little information, but the rest would be up to him. Yang Feilong wanted to know more about the upcoming disaster. He didn't know much about it himself because he wasn't on the team. Yang Feilong realized that this might be a key piece of information and believed that great people couldn't say anything bad. He sincerely thanked him for his help. I asked him for permission to call him by his first name. Yang Feilong knew from the first time they met that he really needed an ally like Shulai, but he didn't even know about their relationship with his sister before. Li Shulai felt that he was thinking too much because he couldn't leave China's future in the lurch. I invited him to have a chat next time. Yang Feilong asked Brother Shulai to pay special attention to his problem. After saying that, he left. Yang Feilong kept thinking about her predictions, not knowing what could possibly happen. Li Shulai wished him a safe journey, but Xiaoning stopped him abruptly. She confessed about her plans that she planned to cultivate for half a year in the temple. Li Shulai thought about his plans, and I wanted to train hard and look for ways to help her with the stagnation in her body. She hadn't expected any help from him. Li Shulai reminded her that he was her senior and that this was his direct responsibility, and he was going to visit his sister, so he said goodbye. Xiaoning was still pleasantly surprised that he wanted to help and thought that Zulai could help her with her training as well. Her only solution at the moment was pear cultivation, but she immediately blushed at the thought of it. Xiaoning realized that he still wanted to study with her, even though he had previously rejected her and flirted with others. She hesitated, not understanding what he was up to. The next day came and Li Shulai woke up with his eyes open, but he immediately jumped out of bed because his sister was sitting in front of him and it scared him. She assumed that they were discussing with Yang Feilong the events that would happen in 20 years' time. Li Shulai didn't understand how she knew, but they were talking too loudly. The sister concluded that he either knows how to see the future or was reborn. He was shocked that she understood so quickly. She spoke as if she were communicating with God himself. Li Shalai was going to make things clear right away. But it didn't really matter to Sis, since she only knew him now, and his past identity didn't matter as long as he was her disciple. He noticed that she wasn't nervous at all, which made her even greater. Sis praised him for keeping quiet, for not revealing the whole secret to young Feilong. Everyone had their own fate, and a random phrase can lead to terrible consequences, and it's worth knowing the measure. She explained that if there was a disaster, there was nothing she could do. Li Shalai thanked her for the guidance on one knee, knowing that she had come for help, and she wasn't even surprised by his rebirth. My sister ordered me to wash my clothes first and then stop by her place in Qingyun after breakfast. He was happy that he could finally learn something new, and he was able to achieve great results last time. My sister stopped abruptly, and with a red face, she ordered him to finally get dressed. Li Shalai looked down, realizing that he wasn't even wearing a piece of clothing. He covered himself with a pillow and accepted her order in shame. Li Shalai walked up to the waterfall. He started looking around. He tried to look for his sister, but she was already standing behind him, ready to strike. Li Shalai reacted immediately, but I still got hit on the back. And because of that, he stood right on the edge in front of the water. After that, he immediately fell into the water. Li Shalai emerged from the water, grabbing the air. He started looking around to deal with the scoundrel, but the forest was completely silent. He shouted for this daredevil to come out and answer for his actions. Li Shalai looked around while standing waist-deep in the water. He was already half a step away from cultivation, and now no one could pass by him without being noticed. But it could also be a trap from my sister. He shouted, promising that she wouldn't be able to get past him. Sis finally emerged from the bushes, confessing to her ambush. Li Shalai didn't expect anything else. She insisted on ignoring the past and future and living in the present. These were the rules of cultivators. And if he was truly ambushed, he would be lying in the bushes by now. But for now, he was just gaining experience, and the sister decided to tell about a similar case when her mentor also ambushed and taught her a lesson. She clarified whether her stroke was painful. Li Shalai became conceited, pretending that it didn't hurt at all. But at that moment, it was overclocked. Her sister's foot touched the cold water, and she gently touched his chest while he was shaking with embarrassment. His sister offered to help him heal. She closed her eyes and thought. My sister told me that killing people for treasure, looking for money or stealing was a common practice in cultivation, but she didn't recommend going down that path. She asked him not to do anything that might harm others, and even if she was his sister, he shouldn't trust her completely, because even she could stab him in the back. Li Shalai stiffened at her words, but his face immediately turned red at the sight. Because my sister is soaking wet. He closed his eyes, trying not to think about it at all, but she suddenly snuggled even closer. His sister hugged him gently. Li Shalai could sense that even his sister smelled like a young girl, but he didn't want to allow such thoughts in her direction, considering himself shameless. After all, they just talked about life and shared their experiences, and you should be calmer. His sister explained that she had brought him here because of his physical abilities, which still needed to be strengthened. Cultivation wasn't just about refining one's qi and heart, but also one's body, and without it, one couldn't reach heights. In the future, you can't ignore training, otherwise there will be no point in cultivating. His muscles should have been ready. Li Shalai had already opened his channels due to bathing in the spring, but it wasn't enough. He was glad that the torture was finally over. My sister decided that they would study together today. She and offered to study together. Li Shalai's nose instantly bled at the sight. She moved closer to the waterfall and the rock. She sat down in the lotus position, not understanding why he continued to doubt her. Li Shalai couldn't say the reason, but he reminded himself inside that love wasn't his goal of rebirth. He took a deep breath, realizing that his sister didn't care about his gender at all. Since she wasn't shy, Li Shalai also decided to take off her clothes. The two of them sat under the flow of water in the lotus position, meditating. But he watched her from behind as she meditated. I could see the water running off her skin. Li Shalai was shocked that she was sitting so calmly without any clothes on, as if she didn't care. It was already evening. They continued to sit on the same rock, but my sister finally announced the finish line. Li Shalai was crying with happiness that this ordeal was over, as his entire body was petrified, and he didn't even have the strength to speak. Sis was interested in him while the others couldn't stand it for an hour, but he asked for a very long time, and his face turned to stone. And no one was his equal. Suddenly, Li Shalai just fell on his side and fell into the water. A second later, he woke up in bed, and he felt like he'd been exercising all night. His body was all swollen up and his back hurt like hell. At that, Xiaoning was sitting next to him, wetting the rags, telling him that his sister had brought him back because of the heat. Now he understood. Xiaoning wasn't going to take care of him, but he had a very high fever and the pills had stopped working, so only he can help himself. The grandparents were currently drinking tea, and they didn't have time. If it wasn't for Xiaoning, he would have already died. Li Shilai thanked her more sincerely. But her expression changed to an arrogant one as she laughed at his condition after training. He was afraid that she would hit him soon. Xiaoning abruptly threw a towel in his face, telling him to take care of himself. Li Shilai watched her go, not understanding why she was so calm today. He lay back, wondering if she'd been so affected by his earlier words, but most likely Xiaoning won't chase after him anymore. 2 days passed. Li Shilai, his sister, this wasn't the worst consequence, and the rebirth was much worse, and such failures are easy for him to survive. He dressed quickly, preparing to go out. When Li Shilai arrived at the same waterfall, Xiaoning was sitting under it, meditating. Her eyes were tightly closed as water ran down her face. He knew very well that Xiaoning's channels were blocked, and she didn't have the ability to cultivate. But I decided not to bother her, going for a little run. Xiaoning was already standing on the rock, as if she had noticed it. Li Shilai turned around awkwardly, assuring himself that he didn't come with bad intention. But she didn't notice him as she stood facing the rock. She suddenly started shaking and waving her hand. In and then exhaled. Li Shilai watched her, doubting that she didn't know how to cultivate. He could already imagine her beating him up for being weak, but Li Xiaoning dusted off her hands after being hit. Abruptly, she dropped to the ground, standing up on one arm. She started doing quick push-ups. Li Shilai froze in place in shock. Then she started doing abs exercises. The cubes on her stomach were already clearly visible. He opened his mouth in surprise. Xiaoning straightened her hair, noticing the result clearly. She turned and walked on, and at that moment she began to undress. Xiaoning started to bathe under the waterfall, and Li Shilai turned away sighing. He could imagine how much she had endured to get into the secret realm. It's not difficult for cultivators at the foundation stage to cut the stone in half, but for Xiaoning, who doesn't have that level of cultivation, it should be difficult. Li Shilai assumed that she had been secretly studying in order to make such progress. He felt that he wasn't putting in enough effort, that he was going to try harder. Li Shilai started his run through the forest. And on the way, I met my sister. She suspected that he had seen it all. He didn't hide it himself, but he realized that he didn't understand Xiaoning at all. He thought his sister handed him a cloth to wipe away his sweat. Li Shilai realized that he was too blind to notice her true character. She was not only good at school, but also at sports, was beautiful and kind. And in a previous life, he fell in love with her while she was running on the sports field. It was now clear to him that he himself was not worthy of Xiaoning. Sis just wanted to tell him the truth, and now she hoped that he wouldn't waste his talent. Li Shilai promised her to train hard. Morning. Li Shilai had been doing all sorts of training since morning, and after a month his muscles had grown significantly. He was drying off, planning to do 500 push-ups and squats for the last time. But the phone in his pocket rang. He begged for advice on how to avoid a tragedy, intending to give him 10% of the shares as payment, but Li Shilai wasn't interested. Young Fei Long understood this and apologized for the suggestion. He just hoped he hadn't offended him. Li Shilai didn't care at all and just wanted to discuss something with him. He advised not to worry about the future and to live in the present. Now Fei Long was developing in the right direction, even though the prospects for development are bad, and you should think more about logistics. Young Fei Long was glad that he had at least received some information. Li Shilai, and if he continues to work for the good of the state, he will not lose his way. And regardless of his plans, it is better to think about positive results. He summed it up so that Fei Long would follow his ideas, pondering each step. After his words, he immediately dropped the call. Young Fei Long slammed his hand down on the table. Li Shilai opened his eyes again. He glowed, knowing that he understood now. Fei Long believed that only Shulai could guide him on the right path, and these words once again motivated the dreamer in him, wanting to work for the good of the country. All the employees were spying on him, not understanding why he suddenly became so agitated. Li Shilai started to do 500 push-ups on one hand, but was interrupted by a voice. Familiar heels appeared in front of him. Sis suggested that he move from the chi refining stage to the foundation stage if everything went well, but if not, he would have to train even more. Li Shilai was full of motivation and energy, but he was starting to doubt inside, remembering that he had been lying down for 2 days with a fever after the last training session. My sister ordered me to get dressed and follow her, but he didn't want to interrupt his squats, so his sister suggested that he catch up after their workout. They came to a strange glowing door. She touched the sign, which glowed brighter. The door opened, revealing a long, dark corridor. His sister introduced him to the realm of illusions, telling him to go straight ahead so that the monsters wouldn't see him. But first she wanted to warn him what would happen if he was caught. Li Shilai turned around, realizing that she hadn't finished speaking and the monsters might kill him. As he watched, the area was clear, and he hoped that Sis had killed some of the monsters. He took a couple of steps but saw a silhouette. It was a huge white tiger. I could tell from his growl that he wasn't friendly. Li Shalai tried to persuade him not to do anything, but the tiger ran after him as Li Shalai started to run away. A task appeared in front of him, where he must reach the finish line within half an hour, but the penalty for refusal was hidden behind question marks. He knew. His eyes widened when he saw the next path. In front of him was an obstacle in the form of a bridge down. He jumped on it and began to roll down. Li Shalai landed softly and thanked himself for running around, hauling water, and climbing mountains for days on end. He started jumping on the pillars while the tiger was slightly behind, and Li Shalai was much more resilient. He already had 10 minutes left. Li Shalai was worried that the punishment might be death, and he was not going to give up after all. This rebirth was so hard for him. He remembered his sister's advice to avoid being caught by monsters. The tiger leapt at him as Li Shalai tried to speed up. His paw landed on the ground, causing it to crack. Li Shalai was able to dodge his punch. He sat down, exhaling heavily. He stood in front of the finish line and saw the silhouette of his sister. There were tears in his eyes when he managed to pass the test. He ran forward, knowing that the finish line was right in front of him, but the tiger continued to chase him. He pounced after him. But my sister called it quits, and the tiger turned to dust. She happily congratulated him on successfully passing the test. Sis didn't even expect that he would show such high hopes and pass the test. But Li Shalai was too obsessed with his own survival. He decided to find out the potential penalty after all, but it turned out that it simply wasn't there. The sister took his hand and began to run it over his palm. She knew that in the realm of illusions, monsters were very ferocious, but in real life they wouldn't hurt. And she checked his pulse, because after such a run, he should have soared to 200. Li Shalai waited for her to continue her sentence, but now it was clear that this was why she didn't finish her sentence before starting. His sister announced that he could now officially start cultivating and asked him to follow her to teach him the mental techniques. Li Shalai thought that they would be reading books, but my sister had easier ways. They arrived at an unknown lake. His sister immediately asked him to undress. Li Shalai didn't resist anymore and started to undress. But I couldn't understand why my sister was also taking off her clothes. She decided not to explain it, but to show it in practice. Li Shalai sighed, hoping that it wasn't a pair cultivation, because he couldn't refuse her. Sis immediately clarified that it wouldn't be a pair cultivation. Even with her back to him, she predicted that his nose was going to bleed. Li Shalai immediately put a cloth to his nose, not understanding how it happened. He stood up, ready to start training. My sister ordered me to undress again. And Li Shalai realized that he needed to remove absolutely everything. My underpants flew straight into the water, and my sister took off her shoes. They both took a dip in the lake. Li Shalai closed his eyes, but his sister came closer. Her sister asked her to listen carefully so that there would be no problems. Li Shalai agreed, turning away. His sister gave him a sharp hug. She leaned closer. Li Shalai began to doubt that it wouldn't be a pair cultivation. He remembered that he was an ordinary, innocent guy who had just come out in public. His sister ordered him not to move. Li Shalai was shy, trying not to do anything. She told me not to move anything at all. My sister asked me to focus on her voice, and this technique is based on the energy of heaven and earth and combines the 5 elements and yin and yang. It was the most effective way to immortality. His heart should be like water, and his mind like a rock, and his mind was one of the components. She was going to give him a piece of her heart to keep her safe. Laying the foundations was about merging with nature, following the will of the sky, and feeling the life energy. Li Shalai was sitting alone, and the water around him was glowing. He opened his eyes slightly, feeling that he was entering the realm of the immortals. Suddenly, he was in the sky just before sunset. Li Shalai was shocked to see the whole world. He began to walk calmly on the water, and the birds surrounded him like a god. Now he could see everything, both nature and the universe. He even saw the Milky Way with his own eyes. But at that moment, he was called out. A huge sister appeared behind him and ordered him to wake up. Li Shalai began to rub his eyes. He looked ahead, realizing that he was still in that lake. He couldn't figure out where he was, but his sister didn't give him an answer. She explained that at the foundation stage, he would be able to cultivate on his own, but the main thing was to have clear thoughts. When he could lay a solid foundation, they would move on to other training sessions. Li Shalai got dressed and hesitantly agreed. At this moment, he noticed Xiaoning. She noticed something. Li Shalai didn't understand her reaction, but when he looked down, there was a bright fire burning in his eyes. She saw that he had reached the foundation stage and congratulated him, because now he was much stronger. But Xiaoning clenched her fist, knowing that she hadn't moved at all. Li Shalai was trying to think of a way to help her, other than pair cultivation. Xiaoning was already refusing to help. I walked past him to find my grandmother. Li Shalai noticed that she had completely stopped showing emotions due to her depression. Night fell, and he sat down at his laptop. He found a way to get online. Li Shalai finally finished and started looking for Kexen's number. Then he was able to open her profile. When he succeeded, he was overjoyed. Li Shalai started typing rapidly. He inquired about business, but Kexen had already cut ties with her family and left home. Shulai wrote to her that he was now training every day. He even tried to tell her about cultivation, but she just laughed. It wasn't surprising that she didn't believe him, but he just didn't want to lie to his idols. Suddenly, he received another message. It was Xiao Yu's profile. He read the quote that was written in the description, and everything was like the past. Li Shalai decided to keep up with the trend and make friends online. He received a message and immediately clicked on it. She wrote asking why she couldn't get in touch sooner. And she told me that she had found a large library with a large collection of books, offering to go. He thought about it and realized that Xiao Yu was just a pseudonym for Wei Yu. In their time, everyone preferred a pseudonym, but Li Shalai didn't expect her to be so outgoing online. He explained that he was undergoing adaptation training, which he is not allowed to talk about, so he just went online. Wei Yu was surprised at how hard he worked, and she was also going to try harder. After texting, she smiled. Later, in the temple, Li Shalai carried a lot of water on his shoulders and trained, and cultivated under the waterfall. 2 whole months passed and my sister appeared from behind. He asked me to check his progress. His sister suddenly attacked him in the back, but he managed to dodge. Li Shalai was shocked, not expecting this at all. She did not see any other way to check in order to study more. 2 more months passed, and he finally reached the final stage of laying the foundations, after which he would become the owner of the Golden Pill. He decided to sit down at his laptop and read the news. He thought he was already talking like an old grandfather. Young Fei Long still took the advice and set up his own logistics company, but Li Shalai was afraid that something would go wrong. Lu Daxi was also doing well, but they were going to run into trouble soon. All external events were planned, so Li Shalai decided not to interfere. But for some reason, there was no response from Lin Yanhong, even though the disc was sent to him. He thought it might not have been delivered from the front desk. The case is being moved back a few months. Mr. Lin was given a disc with all the necessary information written on it. He asked who exactly sent it, and the receptionist described the senior student as ambitious and energetic. Lin Yanhong wasn't interested in anything else, and he demanded to hand over the disc. Afterward, he ordered her to get back to work. He put the CD back on the shelf. I was going to continue the meeting. Lin Yanhong explained that the development of the Internet of Things will be a big trend in the future, and this meant that the Internet will become an important way to filter news. He believed that the index engine would become a huge traffic portal, which was an important focus for Chengdu. He wanted to give the world a slogan so that everyone would turn to them to solve problems. Lin Yanhong even planned to make Fei Long Company use their traffic portal. All the employees shouted with happiness, praising the company. Lin Yanhong was going to find new companions, planning to rake in the Fei Long Company as well.